I was turning 34 the day everything started to unravel. My name's Dale, and for most of my life, I've been the kind of guy who avoids conflict. You know the type, quiet at family gatherings, does the dishes without being asked, helps out when people need something, even when they forget to say thank you. For years, I told myself that being the nice one would keep the peace. But peace has a price, and I didn't realize how high it was until my nephew spat on my birthday cake. My family isn't evil, just entitled. My mom has this habit of rewriting history to make herself the hero. My sister, Trina, is her mirror image, dramatic, loud, and somehow always the victim, no matter what happens. Then there's me, the responsible one. The one they call when something breaks, when bills pile up, when they need help just until next month. For a while, I didn't mind. I thought helping meant being loved. I thought family loyalty was supposed to work both ways. Turns out, I was wrong. That birthday was supposed to be simple. I had planned a quiet dinner at my mom's house. Nothing fancy, just family. I even brought my own cake because I knew no one else would. It was a small thing, but it mattered to me. I'd been working crazy hours to help pay down some old family debts, and I figured, for once, maybe I could have one evening that wasn't about fixing someone else's mess. Just one night where people showed up for me. Trina arrived half an hour late, dragging her 7-year-old son, Milo, who was already clutching a tablet and chewing something loudly. "Sorry, we were busy," she said, breezing past me like she was arriving at a fan convention instead of her brother's birthday. You know how kids are. I smiled anyway, because that's what I do. I said it was fine. I offered Milo some of the chips on the table. He ignored me. My mom came in from the kitchen, drying her hands. "Oh good, everyone's here," she said cheerfully, though she clearly wasn't looking at me. Her eyes went straight to Trina. "Sweetheart, I made your favorite, lasagna." It was my birthday, but apparently, the menu was based on my sister's preferences. I didn't say anything. I'd learned long ago that pointing things out only made me sound ungrateful. So I sat down, listened to them talk about Trina's new business venture, which, as usual, involved her quitting her job to pursue her passion for something that wouldn't pay a cent, and tried to enjoy the evening. Every time I spoke, it felt like my words were background noise. When I mentioned a project I'd been promoted on, my mom said, "That's nice," and turned to ask Trina how her art journey was going. I tried to laugh it off, but something about the way Milo was kicking his feet against my chair made my jaw tighten. Dinner ended, and I brought out the cake. Chocolate, homemade, simple but good. I even wrote, "Happy Birthday, Dale," on it myself. My mom clapped half-heartedly. Trina scrolled through her phone, and Milo, well, he stared at it like it had personally offended him. I bent down to grab a knife when I heard the wet, unmistakable sound of spit. When I looked up, Milo's face was smug. There it was, a thick glob right on top of the frosting. "You don't deserve it anyway," he yelled, with that mean, bratty confidence only a kid who's never been told no could have. The room went silent for half a second, then burst into laughter. My mom laughed the loudest. "Oh my gosh, Milo. You're terrible," she said between giggles, not even pretending to scold him. Trina chuckled too, waving it off. "He's just playing, Dale. Don't take it so seriously." I stood there, holding the knife, staring at the ruined cake, feeling heat crawl up my neck. I wanted to say something. I wanted to scream. But all I did was breathe and mutter, "It's fine." Because in this family, the moment you stand up for yourself, you're the problem. I tossed the cake into the trash and said I wasn't hungry anymore. My mom rolled her eyes. "Dale, you're being dramatic. He's a kid. You really need to lighten up." I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just grabbed my coat and left. On the drive home, I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. But it was. It wasn't about the cake. It was everything. Years of being dismissed, used, and laughed at the moment I showed a hint of hurt. I thought maybe I'd wake up the next day and it would all blow over. Instead, I got a text from my mom around midnight. "Dale, you really overreacted tonight. Milo's just a child, and you need to stop taking things so personally. Maybe it's better if you don't come around for a while. It's exhausting walking on eggshells around your moods." That one hit me harder than I expected. Walking on eggshells around my moods? The same woman who called me every month to fix her bills? The same one whose phone I paid for because she forgot to cancel a data plan? I stared at that message for a long time. Not angry, not even sad, just tired. The kind of tired that sits deep in your bones and makes you realize some people will keep taking until you stop letting them. The next morning, something in me shifted. For years, I'd been carrying their weight, financially, emotionally, everything. My mom's car loan, in my name. Trina's credit card debt, I'd consolidated it so her credit wouldn't tank. Even the utilities at Mom's house were under my account because the system's too confusing for her. I used to joke that I was the family's unpaid manager. But that morning, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. It felt like a chain. I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. I went through each account, one by one. The car loan transfer form was already bookmarked. The utilities could be switched back in less than 10 minutes. Trina's debt consolidation? I'd warned her that if she missed one more payment, I'd remove my name. She'd missed 3. For once, I didn't hesitate. My fingers moved steadily. No anger, no revenge, just clarity. It was like setting down a heavy bag I'd been carrying for years. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't announce it or make a scene. I just clicked submit. By noon, everything was legally shifted. Every name, every bill, every consequence, back where it belonged. It was strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, my finances were clean. My phone was silent. The quiet felt like freedom. But peace never lasts long in my family. Around 5 p.m., my phone started buzzing. First, it was a call from Mom. Then Trina. Then Mom again. By the time I checked, I had 12 missed calls and a wall of messages lighting up the screen. Dale, what did you do? Why are you being so petty? You're ruining everything. Call me back now. I just stared at the screen and let it ring. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about control. And for the first time, they didn't have it. I leaned back in my chair, watching my phone light up with panic, and thought, maybe this was what peace actually looked like. But I had no idea that this was only the beginning. The next few days would turn everything upside down. I wasn't prepared for what they'd try next, or how far they'd go to get back at me. The next morning, I woke up to 27 unread messages and a voicemail inbox full of my mother's voice. She'd left one at 3 in the morning, crying into the phone like I'd done something unspeakable. Dale, honey, please, we need to talk. You can't just do this to us. You're acting out of anger, and I know that's not who you are. Call me back, okay? We'll fix it. Together. That last word, together, made me laugh bitterly. Together was never really together in our family. It always meant me fixing what everyone else broke. I put the phone down, made coffee, and stared out the kitchen window for a long time, just listening to the quiet. My apartment felt still, like the world had stopped expecting something from me for once. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was Trina. Her text popped up, all caps. What is wrong with you? You can't just dump this on us. Mom is freaking out. I didn't reply. I just scrolled through the thread of old messages between us, requests for money, favors, promises to pay me back soon, which of course never happened. I noticed how every conversation ended the same way, me saying, don't worry about it. That had always been the problem. I never worried them enough. By noon, Mom finally got me on the phone. Her voice was shaky, but not the kind of shaky that comes from sadness, the kind that comes from someone who's used to getting their way. Dale, you need to put everything back. Right now, you've made such a mess. Mom, it's not a mess, I said, calm but firm. I just put things back where they belong. The car is yours. The bills are yours. Trina's debt is hers. That's how it should have been all along. She scoffed like I'd told a joke. Don't you dare talk to me like that. You know I can't handle all this paperwork. You're so good with numbers, Dale. You always have been. You don't mind, right? Just help me one last time. One last time. I'd heard those words 100 times before. Every last time turned into another, and another, until the last time was a lifetime. I told her no. The silence on the other end was colder than I expected. You're being heartless, she finally said, her voice lowering. You know how much your sister struggles. You're abandoning your family for what? A few dollars? That was the moment I realized she wasn't crying over the money or the loans. She was crying because she'd lost control. For her, my kindness had always been currency, and I'd just declared bankruptcy. That evening, I got home from work to find 3 missed calls from my aunt, 2 from my cousin, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. Apparently, the family group chat had been revived for an emergency meeting. My mom had sent a long paragraph about how I'd blindsided her and financially crippled the family out of spite. I could almost hear the gasps and pity rolling in through the screen. One cousin texted, "Hey man, I heard about what happened. Maybe just talk it out? She's your mom after all." Yeah, she was my mom. The same mom who laughed when her grandson spit on my cake. The next day, I stopped by her house, not to argue, just to pick up some of my old documents she'd been keeping for safekeeping. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Trina's car already there. Figures. Mom opened the door before I could even knock. "Oh, so you do remember where we live," she said, fake smiling like we were in some sitcom. Inside, the air was thick with tension and cheap perfume. Trina sat at the kitchen table, arms crossed, glaring at me like I'd stolen something. Milo was on the couch watching cartoons, completely oblivious. Mom went straight into her performance. "We were just talking about you, Dale. I told Trina you've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe that's why you're acting out." "Acting out?" I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes," she said, her tone suddenly tender, manipulative in that practiced way. "You've always been so responsible, but you bottle things up. And when you finally explode, you hurt people. You've done that before, haven't you?" She was rewriting the story again, making it sound like I was unstable, emotional, dangerous even. I leaned against the counter, trying to stay calm. "Mom, I'm not exploding. I'm just done being taken advantage of." Trina laughed under her breath. "You're seriously overreacting, Dale. Nobody's taking advantage of you. You act like we're criminals or something." "Then why is everything in my name?" I asked quietly. She rolled her eyes. "Because you offered. Don't act like we forced you. You wanted to help." That stung more than I expected. She was right. I had offered. Back then, I thought helping them would earn some respect, maybe even appreciation. But in their minds, my generosity was just the baseline. Anything less than constant sacrifice felt like betrayal. I picked up the folder with my documents and turned to leave. "I'm not arguing about this anymore." As I reached the door, Trina said something I'll never forget. "You always think you're better than us, Dale. Just because you can pay bills and play hero doesn't mean you're some kind of saint. You're miserable, and you want everyone else to be too." I stopped, hand on the doorknob. "No," I said quietly. "I just finally want to be happy without asking for permission." I left before she could respond. Over the next few days, things got worse. Mom stopped answering my texts entirely. My aunt sent a message saying I should apologize before things get permanent. I wasn't even sure what that meant. Then I found out. Mom had gone to the bank, claiming there was fraud on the accounts I'd closed. She tried to have the transfers reversed. The banker called me, confused. "Mr. Holloway, your mother's saying she never consented to the loan changes. Do you want to file a counterclaim?" It took everything in me not to laugh out loud. My mom, the woman who begged me for years to handle her finances, now pretending she didn't know what I'd done for her. "No," I said finally. "I'll handle it privately." That night, I got a new message from Milo's school. Apparently, I was still listed as his emergency contact. I stared at that line for a while. Emergency contact. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been their emergency contact my whole life. Whenever they messed up, whenever something went wrong, I was the number they called. I removed my name from the form the next morning. It felt like deleting a chapter of my life. But the silence that followed was deceptive. My family might have been quiet for a few days, but I could feel something brewing. They'd never handled being told no. I'd taken away the one thing they valued most, dependence, and people like that don't go down without a fight. The storm broke on a Sunday afternoon. I was at the grocery store when I saw Trina's car pull into the lot. My stomach dropped. She parked right next to me, got out, and marched over before I could even shut my door. "We need to talk," she said sharply. I sighed. "Can it wait?" "No, it can't." She looked around, then lowered her voice. "Mom's losing it, Dale. She says she can't pay the bills, and it's your fault. She's been calling the electric company every day, begging for extensions. Do you know how humiliating that is for her?" "Maybe she should have thought about that before laughing in my face," I said quietly. Her eyes flashed. "You're really going to throw that cake thing in our faces forever?" "He's a kid." I stepped closer, keeping my voice even. "It's not about the cake. It's about how nobody cared. You laughed. Mom laughed. And when I finally drew a line, suddenly I'm the bad guy." She looked away, biting her lip. "You know Mom doesn't mean to hurt you." "She doesn't mean to," I said. "She just does it anyway." For a second, something in her expression softened. Then it vanished. "Whatever. Just fix this. Please. I can't deal with her crying anymore." I didn't respond. I just walked past her into the store. When I came out, she was gone, but there was a note under my windshield wiper. It was written in my mother's handwriting. "You're tearing this family apart. I hope you're happy. No love, Mom." No, please call. Just that. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the note. For the first time, I felt something heavier than anger, grief. Not for them, but for the version of myself who kept believing they'd change. I thought about every time I'd stayed silent to keep the peace, every joke at my expense, every time they said I was too sensitive. Maybe I was, but maybe being sensitive just meant I'd finally started feeling what I should have felt years ago. Then came the final straw, the moment everything shifted from family drama to open war. I got home from work 2 days later to find an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a letter from a collections agency. Apparently, the car loan I transferred back to Mom had already defaulted. She hadn't made a single payment. And because she'd forgotten to update her contact info, the agency had listed my address as the point of correspondence. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was the principle. They wanted me to feel responsible again. They wanted to remind me that no matter what I did, I'd never be free of their chaos. I set the letter on the table and stared at it for a long time, my heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with resolve. If they wanted a reminder of who I was, they were about to get one. And this time, I wasn't going to be the quiet one anymore. That was the night I decided enough was enough. I didn't know it yet, but the next move I made would change everything. And once it started, there'd be no going back. The letter from the collections agency sat on my kitchen table like a ghost I couldn't look away from. Every time I walked past it, I felt this mix of disbelief and exhaustion twisting in my chest. For years, I'd paid those bills without question. For years, I trusted that someday, just someday, they'd see everything I'd done for them and appreciate it. But that night, staring at that letter, I realized something that hit me like a punch to the gut. They didn't just take advantage of me. They relied on me being the fool who'd never stop. And when I finally stopped, they decided to punish me for it. 2 days later, I got another envelope, this one certified mail. My first thought was that it was another collections notice. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was from my mom's lawyer. Apparently, she'd filed a small claims case against me for financial misconduct and emotional distress. Emotional distress. From the woman who told me not to come around anymore. The claim said I'd unlawfully removed financial support, which caused significant hardship to the household. There was a number attached too, $14,600. That was supposedly the total of damages I'd caused by removing my name from her accounts. I sat down hard on the couch. I read it 3 times, thinking it had to be some kind of misunderstanding. But there it was in black and white, Holloway versus Holloway. My own mother suing me. I called her immediately, hands shaking. She picked up on the second ring. "Mom," I said, my voice tight, "what is this? You filed a lawsuit against me." There was a pause. Then that calm, cold tone she always used when she wanted to sound innocent. "Oh, Dale, you left us no choice. You've created such a mess, and I can't afford to lose everything because of your little tantrum." "Tantrum," I repeated, my voice breaking slightly. "You laughed in my face on my birthday, told me I was too sensitive, and now you're suing me?" "I didn't laugh at you," she said sharply. "You're twisting things, like you always do. I just want things to go back the way they were." "The way they were," I said, almost laughing. "Where I paid your bills and Trina's debts while you two treated me like the help." Her voice snapped. "Don't talk about your sister like that. She's going through a lot. She's been going through a lot for a decade," I said. "And somehow, I'm always the one who pays for it." "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, her tone shifting again, soft and rehearsed. "If you just fix what you broke, I'll drop the case." There it was, the manipulation I knew too well. Not an olive branch, a leash. "I'm not fixing anything," I said finally, the words steady even though my hands weren't. "You started this. You deal with it." Her silence lasted a full 5 seconds before she hung up. I sat there in my quiet apartment, staring at the phone screen, feeling something inside me break. Not anger, not sadness. Just a hollow kind of disappointment that felt worse than either. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the lawsuit. It was about what it meant. My mom had always made excuses, always guilt-tripped me, but deep down, I thought she loved me in her own warped way. But this was her saying, "I'll destroy you if it means getting my way." And as twisted as it sounds, That clarity was freeing. The following week was a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I spoke to an attorney who couldn't hide his surprise when I explained what was happening. "You're being sued by your mother," he said, flipping through the documents. "For not paying her bills." "Pretty much," I said. He shook his head slowly. "I've seen family disputes over inheritance, property, custody, but this is new." We went over the details together. Most of the accounts had clear documentation that the loans and utilities were originally under my name as a favor, not as joint ownership. That worked in my favor legally, but emotionally, it was a nightmare. Every email, every form I signed years ago trying to help them, it all came back to haunt me. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. I didn't tell anyone at work what was going on. How could I? "Hey guys, can't make the meeting. My mom's suing me for being too responsible." But somehow, they found out anyway. It started small, one coworker mentioning that Trina had posted something on Facebook about family betrayal. I didn't have Facebook, but a friend sent me screenshots. There it was, a long, melodramatic post about how some people think money makes them better than everyone else, and how family means nothing to those who only care about control. The comments section was full of sympathy. "So sorry you're going through that, Trina. You deserve better, girl. Stay strong. Some brothers just don't get it." My brother. My name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew who she meant. Then came the kicker. My mom commented underneath, "Proud of you for speaking your truth." I think that was the first time in my life I actually felt hatred toward them. Not anger, not frustration, pure, quiet hatred. Because it wasn't enough for them to use me. Now they were painting me as the villain to everyone else. The next time I saw my mom was at the pretrial mediation. She walked into the room wearing a soft pink sweater and that fake, gentle smile she always used in front of strangers. Trina was with her, looking smug and self-righteous. The mediator tried to start with pleasantries, but it went downhill fast. "Mrs. Holloway," the mediator said kindly, "it seems your son was helping you manage these accounts voluntarily, correct?" My mom sighed dramatically. "At first, yes, but he promised to keep helping. It was an agreement between us." I looked up sharply. "No, it wasn't. You begged me to take them on because you didn't want late fees." She didn't even look at me. "You see how he talks to me? This is exactly what I'm dealing with. He's aggressive, controlling." Trina chimed in. "He's always been like this. He thinks he's the only one who works hard." I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. "You both called me whenever you needed money. You laughed when Milo spit on my cake. Then you told me I was too sensitive for leaving." Mom gasped like I'd slapped her. "How dare you bring up a child? He's 7. The mediator raised a hand. "Let's keep this civil, please." It went on like that for nearly an hour. Every time I spoke, my mom twisted it into something cruel. Every boundary I'd ever tried to set was painted as emotional abuse. Every favor I'd ever done became control tactics. When it ended, the mediator turned to me privately. "I can't say this on record, but walk away from them. Whatever happens, it's not worth your sanity." I nodded. I already knew that. But my mom wasn't done yet. A few nights later, I got home to find a voicemail from my landlord. "Hey Dale, just giving you a heads up. Your sister called earlier. Said you might be behind on rent and that we should check in." I told her everything's fine, but yeah, just letting you know. I called him back immediately. "She what?" "Yeah, said she was your emergency contact." Weird, right? Weird didn't even begin to cover it. They weren't just trying to ruin my finances now. They were trying to smear me to everyone around me. I checked my credit report that night, and sure enough, 2 inquiries had been made under my name in the last 48 hours. I hadn't applied for anything. I froze. They were trying to open new accounts in my name again. That was when something inside me went completely still. I didn't feel panic anymore. Just a cold, steady kind of calm. I gathered every document, every message, every screenshot I'd kept over the years. I called my lawyer the next morning and told him I wanted to countersue, not just for damages, but for identity fraud and harassment. He hesitated for a second. "That's a serious move." "So is trying to destroy your own son," I said quietly. By that point, my mother's sweet old lady mask was slipping fast. Her texts turned nastier, accusing me of being ungrateful, heartless, even possessed by greed. Trina followed suit, sending me a message that said, "I hope you realize Mom's not going to live forever. You're going to regret this." That one stung, not because it was true, but because it was the kind of emotional grenade they'd always used to keep me in line. Guilt, shame, fear, but not this time. The night before the court date, I sat in my apartment surrounded by paperwork. Old bank statements, receipts, messages, proof of every sacrifice they'd conveniently forgotten. For years, I'd kept everything just in case. Now I finally knew why. Still, when I looked at her name on the case file, plaintiff, Carol Holloway, a part of me still felt that ache. No matter how toxic she was still my mother. And for some pathetic reason, I still hoped she'd walk into that courtroom the next day and say, "I'm sorry, Dale. Let's stop this." But deep down, I already knew she wouldn't. Because for people like her, love was just another form of leverage. And the next morning, she'd prove it in a way that would break whatever pieces of trust one had left. What she did next made the lawsuit look like a slap on the wrist. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, my mom's, rehearsing that sweet, fragile act she always pulled in front of others. The way she'd tilt her head slightly, clutch her purse, and speak in that soft, trembling voice that made her sound like the victim of every situation. I knew that version of her was going to show up in court, and I knew exactly how convincing she could be. By the time the sun came up, I'd stopped pacing and just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. I wasn't scared of losing money anymore. I was scared of what I was about to lose emotionally. The last bit of faith that maybe, deep down, we were still a family. The courtroom was small, the kind you'd expect for local cases. Pale yellow walls, wooden benches, that faint echo of footsteps when someone entered. My mom was already there when I walked in, sitting next to Trina. She was wearing a navy cardigan and clutching a tissue she didn't need yet. Trina glanced up when she saw me, then leaned in to whisper something to Mom. They both nodded. My lawyer, Daniel, greeted me quietly. "You ready?" "Not really," I said. He gave a sympathetic half-smile. "Just stick to the facts. Don't let her bait you emotionally." That was easier said than done. When the session started, Mom spoke first. Her voice was calm but tearful, perfectly balanced between heartbreak and dignity. "Your Honor, I love my son," she began. "But over the past few months, he's made choices that have caused a great deal of harm to me and my daughter. We trusted him with our finances because he insisted on handling them. We never asked him to. But when he decided to walk away, he left us drowning. We can't afford to live like this." I sat there listening, numb. She wasn't even lying outright. She was twisting the truth just enough that it sounded believable. That was her gift. When it was my turn, I kept my voice even. "Your Honor, I took over those accounts because my mother asked me to. There are years of messages showing her requests. When I stopped, I transferred everything legally back into their names. Nothing was taken. I didn't touch a cent that wasn't mine." The judge asked a few questions. My lawyer presented the paperwork. Everything checked out. On paper, I was fine. But emotionally, I was wrecked. When the hearing ended, the judge didn't make a final ruling that day. We'd get it in writing later. As soon as we stepped out, I saw Trina smirking near the exit. "You really had to drag Mom through this, huh?" she said under her breath. "She sued me," I said quietly. She shrugged. "She wouldn't have if you hadn't abandoned her." That word again. Abandoned. Like I was supposed to carry their lives forever. I didn't respond. I just walked past them. That was the lowest I'd felt in years. Not because of the lawsuit, but because standing there, watching them walk away arm in arm, I realized I didn't have a family anymore. I'd been holding on to the idea of one, pretending that if I just did enough, gave enough, endured enough, they'd eventually see me as more than their safety net. But they never would. That night, I got home, took off my jacket, and just sat in silence. My apartment was dark except for the glow of the city outside my window. My phone buzzed twice, once from my landlord reminding me about the new lease renewal, and once from an unknown number. I opened it. "Hey Dale, this is Rebecca from HR. Just wanted to confirm your meeting tomorrow about your work conduct. See you then." My stomach dropped. Work conduct? I hadn't done anything wrong. I opened my email, and there it was, an official notice from HR saying a complaint had been filed about me harassing a family member at the workplace. My company had strict anti-harassment policies. I didn't even work with my family, but apparently, the complaint included online harassment through social media and communication channels. I didn't even have social media. Then I saw the attached evidence. Screenshots of messages, fake ones, Text conversations that looked like I'd been sending threatening messages to my sister. "You'll regret this. I'll ruin you. Don't cross me again." They were convincing too. The profile picture matched mine. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. I could tell they'd used one of those fake number apps. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was sabotage. The next morning, I walked into work half asleep and half in disbelief. The HR rep, Rebecca, was kind but distant. "We just need to clarify some details, Dale. It's probably a misunderstanding." I told her everything. That I hadn't sent those messages. That my family was retaliating because I cut them off financially. Thankfully, she believed me enough to hold off on any disciplinary action until they investigated. But the humiliation of even sitting there explaining it. I can't describe it. I felt exposed. Like my private pain had been dragged into every corner of my life. That night, I didn't even turn the lights on when I got home. I just collapsed on the couch. I thought about everything. Every Christmas gift I'd bought them. Every time I'd skipped a vacation to pay one of their bills. Every night I'd listened to Mom cry about how hard it is being alone, while she ignored the fact that she'd made me feel lonelier than anyone ever could. I don't know how long I sat there, but at some point, I realized I was crying. Not loud, not messy, just quiet tears I didn't even notice until one hit the back of my hand. For the next week, I went through the motions: work, home, sleep, repeat. My lawyer told me the case was leaning in my favor, but I barely cared. Even winning wouldn't change what I'd lost. Then one evening, I got a message from an unknown number again. Just one line. "You should have stayed in your place." No name, no context. Just that. I blocked the number, but something in my gut told me it was from them. I started noticing small things after that. My mail opened when it arrived. My car door slightly ajar when I knew I'd locked it. Nothing big enough to prove, but enough to make me look over my shoulder. That's when I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. So, I started quietly planning. Not revenge yet, just escape. I canceled my lease renewal. I started transferring my savings into a new account under a different bank. I deleted every shared account or subscription that had my old email. I sold my car within a week and started biking to work. Every step I took, I felt lighter, like I was peeling their grip off me one layer at a time. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even my friends. I just kept moving silently. One night, while packing a box of old files, I found an old photo album my mom had given me years ago. It was filled with childhood pictures, birthdays, family trips, holidays. In one of them, I was about 10, holding a slice of cake while Mom and Trina stood behind me, smiling. The same smiles they probably wore when Milo spit on my cake decades later. That realization hit harder than I expected. The roles hadn't changed. I'd just gotten older. I closed the album and put it aside. I wasn't going to throw it away. Not yet. But I wasn't keeping it out where I could see it, either. As the days passed, I found a kind of strange peace in my quiet withdrawal. My coworkers noticed I was calmer. I wasn't snapping, wasn't venting. I was just done. I didn't check my phone as much. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. I started waking up earlier, making coffee for myself instead of rushing out the door half distracted. The world didn't change overnight, but my mind did. Then, one morning my lawyer called. "Dale," he said, "the case is officially closed." The court dismissed her claim entirely. I didn't feel joy or triumph, just relief. A soft, tired kind of relief that felt more like breathing after being underwater for too long. But even with that victory, I knew the damage was done. My family wasn't just broken, they'd made sure there was no going back. And as if to confirm it, that evening, my mom sent one last message. "I hope you're proud. You've destroyed this family. No apology. No love. Just blame like always." I didn't reply. I stared at the message, then deleted the entire thread. That night, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker, and for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't owe anyone anything anymore. Not love, not money, not explanations. But as the cold wind brushed against my face, another thought crept in, quiet, steady, and sharp. Maybe I didn't owe them anything, but they still owed me. And for once in my life, I wasn't going to let that go. That was the night I stopped being the quiet one. The night I started planning my next move. The morning after deleting my mom's final message, I woke up with the strangest feeling, peace mixed with purpose. For years, I'd been surviving on guilt and obligation. Now, for the first time, I felt something else, control. Not the kind of control my family accused me of having, but the kind that comes from knowing no one can pull your strings anymore. The first change I made was small. I switched my phone number. It felt symbolic, like cutting the last frayed thread that still tied me to them. No more late-night guilt trips. No more emergency calls. Just silence. It was beautiful. Then I moved. A new apartment across town, smaller but brighter, with big windows that overlooked a quiet park. I furnished it with my own money, every piece chosen for me, not for what would impress Mom. I remember sitting on the floor surrounded by half-assembled furniture, eating takeout from a plastic box, and realizing I was happier than I'd ever been at a table full of people who didn't respect me. Work, too, started to shift. My boss had caught wind of the HR mess and called me in, expecting the worst. Instead, after hearing the truth, she offered me a promotion. "You've handled yourself with composure through all this," she said. "We could use someone like you managing the new accounts." It wasn't just a step up, it was a new chapter. A bigger office, a better salary, a sense that all the quiet suffering I'd endured had somehow hardened into calm confidence. Money wasn't my goal, but I won't lie, it helped. Within a few months, I'd paid off the last of my own debts, built an emergency fund, and started investing. Every paycheck I didn't have to share with my family felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. They still tried to reach me, of course, through distant relatives, old friends, even one of my coworkers. "Your mom's not doing well," they'd say. "Trina's struggling." But I didn't take the bait anymore. I didn't even respond with anger. I just said, "I hope they figure it out," and went back to my day. That calm, detached version of me scared them more than any argument ever could. I started working out again, eating better, sleeping more. The tension that used to sit in my shoulders, the one that came from constantly waiting for someone to need something, was gone. Even my coworkers noticed the change. "You seem different, Dale," one of them said. "Lighter." "Yeah," I said simply. I stopped trying to fix people who enjoy being broken. Still, part of me wondered what they were saying about me now. Curiosity, not concern. So one weekend, I made the mistake of checking Trina's Facebook again through a friend's account. The posts had gotten worse. She'd turned my silence into a saga. "Some people abandon their family the moment they get money," she'd written. "But karma always finds its way back." The comments were the usual chorus of sympathy. My mom had even shared one of them with the caption, "Some wounds never heal." I laughed. For once, it didn't hurt. It just felt pathetic. I closed the browser and focused on something that did matter, myself. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping people with financial planning. It was ironic, really. I'd spent years managing the mess of people who didn't care. Now I was teaching people who actually wanted to learn. One of the coordinators there, Jenna, was kind and sharp-witted. We got along easily, and before long, she was more than a coworker. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was calm, steady, real. She asked questions because she cared, not because she wanted something. When I told her bits and pieces about my family, she didn't flinch or try to fix it. She just said, "You did the right thing." Sometimes the best way to love people like that is from a distance. That line stuck with me. Months passed. The lawsuit faded into memory. The fake messages had been erased from HR records, and the silence from my family became the new normal. But one night, an email popped up that made my stomach tighten. It was from my old bank, the one I'd closed after transferring everything back. The subject line read, "Unusual activity alert." When I opened it, I saw something I hadn't expected. Someone had tried to reopen one of the accounts in my name. They'd failed, but it triggered a notification. I clicked the attached report and saw the address used on the application. It wasn't mine. It was my mom's. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. Then I felt that familiar calm settle over me again, the kind that used to mean defeat, but now meant strategy. They were still trying to use me, still trying to drag me back. But this time, I wasn't angry. I was patient, because this time, I had something they didn't: stability, proof, and power. Over the next few weeks, I quietly built a case file. Not to sue, not yet, but to document. Every attempt, every piece of manipulation, every trace of their interference. I wanted to be ready, not just to defend myself, but to end this once and for all. Meanwhile, life kept improving. My savings grew. My work thrived. I was happier than I'd ever been, even as I kept my guard up. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from an old family friend. Mrs. Carter, who used to live down the street from my mom. She sounded hesitant. Dale, honey, I don't want to stir things, but your mom's been telling people something strange. What is it? I asked, though I already had a bad feeling. She's saying you stole from her, that you drained her accounts and left her with nothing. People are starting to believe it. I leaned back in my chair, eyes narrowing. So that's how it was going to be. If she couldn't win legally, she'd try to destroy my reputation socially. Thank you for telling me, I said. I appreciate it. When I hung up, I didn't feel panic. I felt ready. Because this time, I wasn't just going to protect myself. I was going to make sure every lie they told came back to them, with receipts attached. That was the moment the idea started forming in my head. The plan that would turn everything they'd done against them, perfectly, quietly, and legally. The plan that would make them finally understand what it feels like to lose everything they took for granted. I didn't know it then, but the rise wasn't just about getting my life back. It was about preparing for the fall, theirs. The revenge didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It arrived like a series of small, unglamorous dominoes I set up and nudged with my own two hands. Paperwork, phone calls, a handful of people who still believed facts mattered. I didn't want fireworks. I wanted clean, unavoidable consequences that would force them to look at what they'd built on top of me and see it for what it was. First, I tightened the legal screws. Daniel helped me file a countersuit, defamation, harassment, identity theft. We packaged everything. Bank logs showing the attempts to open accounts in my name, the fake screenshots used to trigger HR, copies of the certified mail from my mother's lawyer, and the small claims filing that never belonged on a mother's desk. More important than the emotion of it all was the trail. Timestamps, IP addresses, signatures, bank officers' notes. A stack of paper that spoke in a voice no amount of acting could drown out. We filed a criminal complaint for identity fraud too. That decision felt oddly righteous. They'd weaponized my identity to smear me and to try and drag my livelihood down. Turning that over to the right people was the closest thing I had to truth as a sword. The detective assigned to the case was deliberate and quiet. Every question he asked felt like a new stone I could finally put down. He said it bluntly. If they'd used forged documents or spoofed numbers, there would be consequences beyond the civil case. While the legal process does the heavy lifting, I built a perimeter around myself. I added fraud alerts at the credit agencies, frozen my credit profile, forwarded all suspicious activity to the bank's fraud department. I handed over the evidence of the fake messages to HR and the company's IT team. They traced the origin of the fake account to an app that allowed caller ID spoofing. The HR complaint was quietly dropped once they had proof. People at work who'd glanced at the rumor feed now either apologized quietly or pretended they never saw anything. That was fine by me. If the legal actions were the foundation of the plan, the next moves were about consequences that hit where it actually mattered to them: control and reputation. I found out Trina was in the middle of trying to get investors for her little consulting hobby-come business. It wasn't a big operation, more like a string of hopeful messages and bad invoices. I contacted one of the potential investors she'd been courting and, calmly and professionally, laid out the financials and the facts. Invoices that didn't add up, promises without contracts, and the almost comical gap between what she pitched and what she actually delivered. The investor pulled out. The single client who'd been on the fence withdrew as well when I handed them bank statements showing overdue payments and bounced checks related to Trina's setup. It hurt her where she wanted validation, by proving nothing there was real. I didn't go to the neighbors or post screenshots in public. I let institutions do the revealing: banks, the police, lawyers, the investor. But word travels, and institutions whisper in the right ears. Mrs. Carter, the neighbor who'd always given Mom the benefit of the doubt, called me after she'd seen a formal notice from the bank flagged for fraud. I didn't want to believe, she said, voice small. But when I saw those documents, I'm sorry, Dale. Her apology was quiet, and it cut deeper than any argument because it didn't need to be loud to be true. The financial dominoes started to fall in their own bureaucratic way. The car that Trina kept promising she'd pay off went into arrears. The finance company sent notices and then began the wheels toward repossession, not because I arranged it, but because the debts were real and unattended, and the lender did what lenders do. Utilities at my mother's house got shut off after several missed notices. The providers couldn't keep sending service without payment. Her I can't handle paperwork got translated into missed payments and late fees. Banks froze flagged accounts pending investigation. The small social scaffolding they'd built, friends who lent money, neighbors who covered for them, started to step back when paperwork and bank letters showed up on their doorsteps. People hate being taken for granted more than they hate being lied to. My favorite part wasn't the losses themselves, but how calm I was when they came. I didn't gloat. I didn't send taunting texts. I let the system and the evidence do the talking. When Trina called me the night her client dropped and cried about how unfair it was, I listened for 5 minutes before saying simply, "Then don't do what's unfair." Her voice went quiet. "You could have helped," she said. "Why didn't you?" I answered honestly. Because helping you had become the same as keeping you on a path that hurt you and everyone around you. I wanted to be done. She hung up. The most satisfying moment was not a dramatic confrontation, but a legal one. In mediation, with the judge's clerk present and our lawyers across from each other, my attorney laid out the evidence of identity fraud and defamation. The prosecutor assigned to the criminal complaint called Mom in for questioning. The detective had already matched the spoof number to a pattern of calls originating from a purchased app, and the signature on one of the bank forms did not match the natural flow of her handwriting. When the prosecutor looked across at my mother, her confident, rehearsed pleas began to fray. There's nothing theatrical about watching someone's armor crack because the hard records do not lie. The mediator asked my mom if she had any documentation to counter the claims, and she had nothing that could counter timestamps and IP logs. The small claims case she'd brought folded like bad origami in front of the countersuit evidence. I expected rage, theatrics, maybe a desperate public speech. Instead, there was a thin, stunned silence, then a string of appeals and attempts to settle. They offered to withdraw their statements if I would sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement. They begged me to think of the children and think of all we've done together. I told them, calmly, that they should have thought of those things before they weaponized my name. The legal end results weren't about bankrupting them. I never wanted to destroy the people who raised me. I wanted accountability. The court ordered Trina to pay restitution to the creditors for certain misapplied funds and required her to attend financial counseling as part of a plea agreement for the identity fraud charges. Mom was officially reprimanded for submitting forged documents, and there was a formal notation in the record that would make banks and other institutions cautious going forward. The defamation suit settled quietly with a public retraction and a small, symbolic sum that I donated to the community center where I volunteered, because I wanted the money to fix something instead of punish. The criminal case led to a caution and community service for Mom and an admission of guilt from Trina on a couple of counts. That part never felt like justice exactly, but it felt like consequence. After the legal dust settled, I was standing in my kitchen when my sister's neighbor, the very one who always baked for holidays, walked into my apartment with an envelope. She looked uncomfortable, hands twisting the paper. "She sent this," she said. "She wanted you to have it." Inside was a stack of old notes, childhood scribbles, a postcard with a crooked drawing of a house, a faded school photo. Tokens of a past that, for a moment, made my chest ache in a way the court records never would. I could have thrown them away. I could have used them in some final, dramatic reveal at a family dinner. Instead, I made tea, sat down, and held those pieces of paper like evidence that people had been more complicated than their worst moments. I left the envelope on the counter, then walked out onto my small balcony to breathe. Revenge had been clinical and careful, and it had worked. I'd reclaimed my life, my name, and my peace. Trina's business dissolved under the weight of unpaid invoices and pulled investments. Mom's social circle shifted. Some people cut ties, some never stopped, but the easiest illusions were gone. And yet, even standing in a brighter apartment, with a better job and a calmer heart, I felt something else moving in the air. The subtle, dangerous sense that when you take away someone's dependence, they sometimes reach for things you can't predict. A week after everything settled, a plain white envelope arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single page. No signature. No name. Just 3 lines. "You think the papers and the courts change anything? We didn't start with money. We started with the truth you can't see. Don't get comfortable." I read it twice, then folded it and put it on the table next to the old school photo. My hands weren't shaking. I felt more curious than afraid. like a chess player being told the opponent still had pieces left on the board. I didn't know who had sent it. It could have been Mom, Trina, or someone else entirely. The letter was a reminder that consequences often ripple further than you expect. I set the page under a paperweight and made a plan. The detective had been thorough and methodical. I'd keep copies of everything in a safe deposit box. I told Jenna about it. She rolled her eyes but agreed it was worth a call to the police to note the threat. Daniel said we should keep a log. And yet, as the sun went down and the city's lights blinked awake, a small, private part of me smiled. The last months had taught me that I was not built to be walked over. I had patience, paper trails, and the law, and more importantly, I had the ability to be precise when it mattered. So I sat there with the school photo and the anonymous note and thought about the next move. They'd certainly felt the fall. They'd been forced to stand in a room full of people who'd seen the paperwork. But the note meant they weren't finished, and neither was I. I poured another cup of tea. There was more to do: clean up, boundaries, maybe even more careful disclosures to make sure they couldn't use innocent people as shields again. I also knew one hard fact: getting them to feel a fraction of the uncertainty and exposure I'd lived with for so long wasn't enough. If I wanted this to be truly over, it would have to be final and complete, and that meant patience and an even cooler hand. The night deepened. I put the photo back in the envelope and slid it into my desk drawer. Then I opened a new document and began listing options: legal, practical, humane. The game had changed from reaction to strategy. Somewhere down the list, I typed a question I didn't know the answer to yet. What would finish this for both of us, in a way that didn't leave open the chance of more anonymous notes? Before I could decide, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number again. The fallout was not cinematic. It was slow, bureaucratic, and utterly final in the ways that matter most. Paperwork, phone calls, quiet doors that never opened again. The courts did their part. Trina's plea agreement and restitution orders were on the record. Mom's forged documents became part of a small criminal file, and the defamation claim ended with a retraction and a small payment I redirected to the community center. Banks flagged accounts. Lenders closed lines, and the few friends who'd stood between me and the truth drifted away from them once the evidence landed on their kitchen tables. That isolation was sharper than any fine or court decision. People who had once answered every frantic call stopped answering. People who'd lent them goodwill suddenly preferred to keep their distance. Consequence arrived in the mundane ways that hurt: missed invitations, polite avoidance at neighborhood events, a business card that no one called. Trina lost the clients she was courting. Reputations and small businesses run on trust, and once someone checks the records and sees unpaid invoices and inconsistent paperwork, that trust dries up fast. She was ordered to pay restitution, which meant tiny, painful payments stretched out over years, enough to make the reality of consequences unavoidable. She also had to attend financial counseling and community service as part of the agreement. The court hoped it was rehabilitation. I hoped it was accountability. Either way, she couldn't slip back into the same pattern of borrowing prestige without responsibility. My mother's consequences were quieter, but no less real. The prosecutor's caution and the formal notation about forged documents didn't make for a dramatic headline in our small town, but it changed the way institutions handled her. Banks required stricter ID checks. Neighbors were less hospitable when she asked for favors, and the calls for emergency help slowed to a trickle because people were wary of getting entangled. A few old friends stopped by once and then never called again. Those were the losses that cut. The social currency she'd built on sympathy evaporated when the paperwork spoke louder than the practiced tremble in her voice. She had to reckon with living within the bounds of what she could actually manage. No more asking others to carry her burdens while she kept the applause. The anonymous note? The detective tracked it. Nothing dramatic, just patient work. A purchase on camera, a pattern of small transactions tied to an account that ultimately led back to Trina. She denied it at first, then broke when the counselor required honesty as part of her program. The confession wasn't cinematic. It was a soft, awful thing, a small voice saying she'd been scared of being exposed and had lashed out. That didn't erase the damage. It did, however, make the ledger complete. She'd lied. She'd tried to drag me down, and when the trail closed, there was nowhere left for her to hide. For a while after everything settled, I felt oddly unmoored. I'd spent decades building myself around the needs of people who never intended to carry me if the roles were reversed. When those roles dissolved, there was a strange silence I hadn't prepared for. Friends stepped in where family stepped out. Jenna stayed. She didn't treat me like a case study or a cautionary tale. She treated me like a partner. We started small things together. Weekend bike rides, cooking dinners, quiet conversations where no one asked me for money or an alibi. She helped me relearn boundaries as a practice, not a punishment. Practically, I closed accounts, froze credit, and started an email filter that made nasty notes go into oblivion. I gave up the idea of dramatic revenge long ago. The legal and social consequences had been enough to stop the momentum of their manipulation. I donated the settlement to the community center with a note, for people learning to stand on their own 2 feet. The director hugged me in a way I'd never been hugged by family. No strings, no ledger, just gratitude. I set up a small scholarship for financial literacy workshops so people like Trina wouldn't be tempted by fast promises and so others could learn the tools I'd once used to bail people out of trouble. There were people who still asked why I'd pressed the charges, why I hadn't simply forgiven and moved on. The answer felt simple and true. Forgiveness without change was just permission for the same harm to happen again. Accountability didn't mean I wanted revenge for revenge's sake. It meant I wanted a future where I did not have to be the family's perpetual safety net because someone else felt fragile. I wanted to sleep without waiting for a call at 3 in the morning begging for cash. I wanted my name to mean me. When the last hearing wrapped and the judge gave the final paperwork, I stood in the hallway and watched my mother and sister talk. Small, private words, the kind that would never reach me. They wore exhaustion like old coats. I felt something for them. Not warmth, not reconciliation, but a quiet pity. It's a strange grief to no longer be the person who fixes everything. It is also a strange relief. I'm not naive. People are complicated and will continue to make mistakes. But the thing that used to define my life, being everyone's fallback, ended not with fireworks, but with forms and consequences and honest bookkeeping. I kept the childhood photo Trina's neighbor handed me and placed it in a drawer. Some memories belong to the past. Some are lessons. The final thing I did was simple. I walked to the park near my apartment one quiet evening with Jenna, sat on a bench, and watched 2 kids chase each other around the grass. One of them tripped and looked up, eyes wet but smiling, and the other ran back to help. I felt a slow warmth spread through me that wasn't because I'd won anything or because anyone had been properly punished enough. It was because I'd finally reached a place where I could be generous without being used, kind without being taken, and available without being owned. I closed the chapter the way I'd always wanted to, quietly, with proof in my hands and a future I chose for myself. The last line of the story I told myself that night was short and true. I had not only reclaimed my name, I had finally kept it. My name is Cassandra, but most people just call me Cass. I'm 32 years old, and to put it bluntly, I've done well for myself. Not in a flashy way, not in a way that screams millionaire, but well enough to be comfortable. I have a career I love, I travel when I want, and I don't lose sleep over bills. Most importantly, I got here on my own. No handouts, no shortcuts, just years of hard work. That's something my family can't stand. I grew up in a household where success was measured in 2 ways: how much you could take from others, and how loudly you could complain when there was nothing left to take. My parents, Lisa and Mark, were experts at both. My older brother, Nathan, and my younger sister, Rachel, followed in their footsteps without hesitation. The 4 of them were a tight unit, always watching each other's backs, but not in a loving, supportive way. More like a pack of wolves, waiting for the right moment to sink their teeth into anyone who showed weakness. I was different. Maybe it was because I was the middle child. Maybe it was because I learned early on that relying on them meant setting myself up for disappointment. Whatever the reason, I left home the moment I could, put myself through college with scholarships and side jobs, and carved out a life that had nothing to do with them. That should have been the end of it. But family ties are complicated. No matter how much distance I put between us, they always found a way to pull me back in. Not with kindness, not with apologies, but with guilt. They were struggling. I was doing well. Wasn't it my duty to help? And, stupidly, I did. It started small. A couple $100s here, paying off a late bill there. Then came the loans that were never repaid, the emergencies that somehow only ever seemed to happen to them. And then, the house. I bought the house 2 years ago as an investment property. A beautiful three-bedroom home in a good neighborhood, the kind of place I wished I'd grown up in. It was supposed to be a rental, something to generate passive income, but my parents had other ideas. The moment they found out I owned a house, the manipulation began. My mother called me in tears, sobbing about how their landlord had raised the rent again, how they couldn't afford it, how they were going to end up on the streets. My father, always the more practical one, didn't cry. He just sighed heavily and told me how disappointing it was that their own daughter would rather rent to strangers than help her family. Nathan and Rachel chimed in too, acting like I was some kind of monster for hesitating. "You have everything," Rachel had sneered. "Why can't you just do this one thing for them?" So, I caved. I told myself it was temporary, that they'd get back on their feet and move out in a few months. But months turned into a year. A year turned into 2. And in all that time, they never paid a single cent. Not for rent. Not for utilities. Not even for maintenance. I covered everything. And if I ever dared to bring it up, they acted like I was the one being unreasonable. "They're your parents, Cass," Nathan had said once, shaking his head like I was some ungrateful child. "You wouldn't even have this house if they hadn't raised you." Rachel was worse. "What's a few $1,000s to you? You make more in a month than most people do in a year." The way they saw it, my success wasn't really mine. It was theirs. Something they were entitled to. Which brings me to tonight. It's my father's birthday, and my mother insisted on throwing a big family dinner at the house I paid for, of course. I had no intention of going. I had long since stopped trying to be part of their little club. But then my mother called, her voice syrupy sweet, telling me how much it would mean to them if I showed up, how it had been so long since we'd all been together. I should have said no. I should have ignored the call and gone about my life. But there's still that part of me, buried deep down, that wants to believe they're capable of being different. That maybe, just maybe, they can treat me like a daughter instead of a walking ATM. So, I go. I park down the street, taking a moment to gather myself before walking up the driveway. The lights inside are bright, shadows moving behind the curtains. Laughter spills out through the slightly open window loud, unfiltered. I pause, my hand on the doorknob, just as my name is spoken. "She actually came?" Rachel's voice drips with amusement. "I thought she was too busy hoarding her precious money to spend time with her family. Maybe she's finally learned to be generous," Nathan laughs. "Doubt it, though. You know how she is. Ungrateful," my mother sighs. "After everything we did for her." My father scoffs. "No husband, no kids, all that money and nothing to show for it. She thinks she's better than us, but in the end, she's going to die alone." Rachel hums in agreement. "She should be grateful she even gets to help us. Not like she'd have anywhere else to belong." I let go of the doorknob. There's no anger, no sadness, just a cold, quiet realization. They will never change. They don't love me. They never did. To them, I'm not family. I'm a resource. A bank account they can draw from whenever they want, with no regard for the person behind it. I step back from the door, turn around, and walk away, my heels clicking softly against the pavement. I pull my phone from my pocket, my fingers steady as I dial the number. A voice picks up on the second ring. "Cassandra? What's up?" I take a breath, the night air crisp against my skin. "I'm ready," I say. "Start the eviction process." Silence. Then, a low whistle. "Finally had enough?" I glance back at the house one last time, the light spilling out like a warm invitation I know better than to accept. "Yeah," I murmur. "I think I have." I hang up the phone and slip it back into my pocket, the weight of what I just set in motion hitting me all at once. My heart doesn't race. There's no rush of adrenaline or triumph. It's more like a quiet relief, like the moment you let go of something heavy after carrying it for far too long. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm finally doing something for me, something that's been a long time coming. I stand there for a minute, just breathing in the cool air, grounding myself before heading back to the family gathering. As I approach the door again, I can hear their laughter from inside. The words are still there, lingering in my mind, Rachel's mocking tone, Nathan's dismissive chuckle, my parents' disappointed sighs. I force myself to take another step and enter the house. The dining room is decked out like some sort of celebration, balloons, banners, and a cake that I know my mother didn't bake herself. The moment I step inside, the conversation dies down, and all eyes shift to me. My family, for all their flaws, knows how to make an entrance feel like an event. The silence isn't uncomfortable, though. It's almost as if they're waiting for something. A dramatic pause before the performance begins. "Cass, you made it." My mother's voice is syrupy sweet, too sweet, like she's trying just a little too hard to play the role of the doting mother. I force a smile and nod, as if her backhanded compliments and veiled criticisms don't bother me. Come in, dear. Take a seat. We've been waiting for you. I slide into a chair at the end of the table, the seat that's always been mine since I was a kid. They've never made room for anyone else. No boyfriends, no partners, no friends, just me. I can feel their eyes on me, but I keep my focus straight ahead, pretending to admire the centerpieces. Rachel shoots me a quick glance, her lips curling up into a barely concealed sneer. It's always been like this with her, like she's bitter I've managed to carve out a life without relying on them. My father grunts from the other end of the table, fiddling with his fork as he eyes me like I'm some kind of puzzle he hasn't quite figured out. So, Cass, he says, his voice low and careful. How's the business going? Still raking in all that cash? His tone is passive-aggressive, the kind of jab that's supposed to sound innocent but is anything but. I don't take the bait. It's going well, I say, keeping my voice neutral. I won't give them the satisfaction of knowing how well it's going. Busy, but good. Good, my mother says quickly, too quickly. Glad to hear it. We've been wondering, though, how much longer we can stay in this place. We don't want to overstay our welcome. The words hang in the air for a moment, and I can't help but laugh inside. They really think I'm that naive, that I haven't noticed the way they've been manipulating me for the past 2 years. The guilt trips, the faux concern, the constant reminders of how hard they've worked for me. All of it, designed to make me feel like I owe them something. Nathan, always the one to push things a little further, leans back in his chair with a smirk. Yeah, I mean, Cass, you're doing so well for yourself. I don't think it'd be too much of a stretch for you to, help us out more. We've been living here for a while now. I feel my jaw tighten, but I keep my composure. You're welcome to stay as long as you need to, I reply, my voice as calm as I can manage. But I think we both know this situation can't go on forever. Rachel pipes up, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Yeah, right? If you ever decide to actually help us. But I guess it's hard when you're too busy spending your money on yourself, huh? I force a smile, but I can see her smirk faltering as I lean forward slightly, my eyes meeting hers. Rachel, you've never been shy about telling me what you think I should do with my life. But just so you know, I don't need to justify my success to you or anyone else. The words are sharp, cutting through the tension in the room, but I don't care. I've let them push me around for far too long. My mother shifts in her seat, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Of course not, dear, she says, but there's a thinly veiled bitterness in her tone. We just want what's best for you, that's all. I glance around the table, and for the first time, I don't feel the pull of guilt or obligation. I don't feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. I know, deep down, that what I'm about to do is the right thing, even if they'll never see it that way. I nod slowly, my gaze hardening. Well, I've made some decisions, and I think it's time we have a conversation about the future, I say, my voice steady, but with a firmness that makes everyone in the room sit up a little straighter. I don't need to say it aloud, they all know what I mean. I'm done being the one they can lean on without ever giving anything back. It's time for them to face the consequences of their actions. The silence stretches on, thick and uncomfortable. My father is the first to break it, his voice low and edged with something like impatience. What's that supposed to mean, Cass? He asks, his brow furrowed. You don't think we've done enough for you over the years? I let out a slow breath, my mind flashing back to all the times I've been the one to help, the one to bail them out, the one to fix things when they couldn't be bothered to try. No, I don't, I answer softly, but the words hit harder than I expected. And I think it's time you all start to figure things out on your own. The room goes still. There's no arguing, no outburst, just a tense, unnerving silence. I can feel my mother's eyes on me, but I don't flinch. I've made my decision. Now, it's time to let them stew on it. As the night drags on, the conversation shifts, but the tension remains. I can tell they're all trying to act normal, but it's like they're walking on eggshells around me. I don't care. I'm done playing along. By the time I leave, nothing has been resolved, but I know something's changed. I've set things in motion. And when I get home, I make that call again, just to confirm. This time, I'm not backing down. And they don't even know what's coming for them. The following morning, I wake up to a quiet sense of satisfaction that lingers in the air. It's not the kind of satisfaction you get from winning a fight, but the kind that comes when you finally put yourself first after years of giving so much to everyone else. I made the call last night, and today, it's all going to come to a head. I'm sitting at my kitchen table, sipping on my coffee, when I hear the familiar ring of my phone. It's my lawyer. I glance at the screen and answer with a steady voice, even though I can already feel the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. Cass, the lawyer greets me, his tone crisp. It's all set. We're ready to send them the notice. My heart skips a beat. I take a deep breath. Perfect. Let's do it. I can already picture it, the shock on my parents' faces when they get the official notice that they have to vacate the house. The house I bought for them to live in, under the pretense that it was just temporary. They don't know that I've already made the arrangements to have them removed if they don't comply. After everything, it's time for them to face the reality of their actions. They've taken advantage of my kindness long enough. As the hours tick by, I try to keep myself calm. I'm not nervous. I'm just ready. I don't need to justify myself anymore. I don't need to wait for their approval or their guilt trips. This is my decision, and I'm not backing down. I can almost hear the arguments already. How could I do this to them? How could I kick them out after everything they've done for me? But I know the truth, they've never truly done anything for me. It's always been about what they could take, not about what they could give. And this is me finally drawing a line in the sand. The text comes through at exactly 11:30 a.m., official, professional, and final. The eviction notice has been sent, and in less than 30 days, my parents and siblings will be out of the house. I stand there for a second, staring at the phone, and let out a slow exhale. A wave of relief washes over me. They won't understand it now, but they will eventually. They have no idea how much this moment has taken out of me. And then, at that exact moment, my phone buzzes again. This time, it's a text from Rachel. It's a single sentence. Why would you do this? I stare at it for a long moment, almost laughing to myself. The audacity of it. It's just like Rachel to flip the script, to make me the villain in this whole situation, to act like I'm the one who's done something wrong. I don't respond right away. It's better to let her stew for a while. I'll deal with it when the time's right. That evening, I drive over to their house to talk to them. The tension is thick from the moment I step inside, and it's not just because of the notice I sent earlier. No, there's something else simmering underneath the surface. My mother's eyes are cold when they land on me, and my father's hands are clenched tightly around his drink. Rachel and Nathan are already seated at the table, their faces like open books, exposed, angry, and confused all at once. They know something is different. They just don't know what. I make my way to the table, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like the one in control. No more walking on eggshells. No more pretending to be something I'm not just to keep the peace. This is my turn. Cass, we need to talk about this, my father says, his voice tight. You can't just throw us out like this. We've been here for 2 years, and you owe us. I don't flinch. Actually, I don't owe you anything. I've done more than enough. But I can't keep doing it anymore. My mother's voice rises slightly, desperate. How can you do this to your own family? After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. Rachel's eyes narrow, and her lips curl into a sneer. It's typical of you, Cass. Always thinking you're better than the rest of us. You think you can just pull this kind of thing without any consequences? I turn to face her, my voice steady but filled with a quiet certainty. I'm not the one who's been using my family's kindness for my own advantage. You're right. Maybe I am better than you. I don't need to hide behind guilt or manipulation. I can stand on my own. Rachel's face flushes, but before she can snap back, my father interrupts, his voice hardening. You think this is about you being better than us? It's about respect. It's about family. You think we don't deserve a roof over our heads after everything we've done for you? We gave you everything, Cass. We sacrificed for you. And look where we are now, I shoot back, my frustration bubbling to the surface. You've been living in my house for 2 years without paying rent, taking advantage of me at every turn. You're not the ones who made sacrifices. You didn't give me anything that was worth anything. I did this all on my own. Enough. My mother snaps, her voice rising in a rare display of anger. I can't believe you'd turn your back on us like this. You're disrespecting your family. I shake my head slowly, the disappointment in their eyes not fazing me anymore. No, Mom, you disrespected me a long time ago. I'm done being your safety net, your charity case, your punching bag. You don't get to guilt trip me into submission anymore. The table goes silent, and for a moment, no one knows what to say. The usual cycle of guilt tripping, manipulation, and self-righteous anger seems to have hit a wall. No one knows how to react when I stop playing along. Rachel's lips tremble with anger, and she stands abruptly, knocking over her chair. I can't even look at you right now, her voice cold and cutting. You're awful. My father stands up, too, his voice low and seething with a barely controlled rage. You don't get to treat us like this. You'll regret this, Cass. You'll regret everything. I won't, I reply, my voice steady and unwavering. Because it's done. The house is mine, and you'll have to figure things out without me. I feel the weight of the words settle between us, and I know that this moment, this conversation will change everything. But there's no going back now. I've crossed a line, and it's too late for them to fix it. I turn to walk out, but not before I hear my father's voice one last time. You'll be sorry, Cass. You'll see. I don't answer. I don't need to. Because I know, deep down, they'll never see things the way I do. And they'll never understand why I did what I did. As I close the door behind me, I feel a strange sense of finality. There's no going back from this. And they don't even realize that I've just set everything in motion. The following weeks felt surreal. Every time I walked into my house, I couldn't help but notice the weight that had lifted from my shoulders. There were no more angry, guilt-ridden texts. No more visits from my parents. No more passive-aggressive remarks from Rachel. It felt like a lifetime of tension had finally unraveled, and for the first time in years, I had room to breathe. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. I knew it wouldn't be. The eviction notice had been crystal clear, and the clock was ticking down. My parents had tried to delay it. They'd attempted to appeal, sending me pleading messages about how hard things were for them. It was the same old story, but I had already made up my mind. My decision was final, and nothing they said could change that. I hadn't heard from them for a while, not until the day the movers arrived. I was at work when I got the text. My mother, ever the victim, had sent it with a simple line, "You're heartless." My first instinct was to respond with something equally cutting, but I stopped myself. There was no need. I had already done what was necessary. They had to face the consequences of their actions. The movers arrived that afternoon. My parents weren't home, which, frankly, was better for everyone. I didn't have to deal with their angry words or guilt-laden attempts to manipulate me one last time. I had given them more than enough chances. Now, they would face the reality of what they had done. By the time I got back home that evening, the house was quiet. It was empty, and the only thing that remained was the hollow space left behind by the people who had once filled it. There were no more arguments, no more demands. I walked through the house, looking at the rooms that had been occupied by them for so long. It was almost like a weight had been lifted from the very walls themselves. The silence was deafening, but it felt good. I checked my phone. There was another message, this time from Rachel. "I can't believe you kicked us out like this. You don't even care about family. You think you're so much better than us." I didn't even bother responding. The next few days were strange. My phone buzzed with family members trying to get in touch, messages from cousins, distant relatives, and even some of my friends who had heard rumors. Some of them tried to play mediator, asking if I could just forgive them, or telling me how harsh I was being. They didn't understand, and I couldn't bring myself to explain. What was there to explain anyway? I had been carrying them for years, allowing them to manipulate me and guilt-trip me into doing everything for them. But no one had ever truly been there for me. No one had ever asked what I needed or how I felt. It was always about what I could give. My parents didn't respect me. They never had. They were angry now, but that would eventually fade. They'd be fine, and if they weren't, that wasn't my problem anymore. A week after the eviction, I finally heard from my father. He didn't ask how I was doing or check on me. Instead, it was a long, angry rant about how I had destroyed the family and that I would eventually come crawling back, realizing my mistake. I read the message, then deleted it. The next family gathering was awkward, to say the least. My parents and siblings were nowhere to be seen. I hadn't expected them to show up, not after everything that had gone down. But I couldn't help but feel that cold pang of disappointment when I realized they weren't there, either. It was probably for the best. I wasn't about to beg them for forgiveness. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into that toxic cycle of guilt, manipulation, and ungratefulness. It was over. As the days passed, I noticed a subtle shift in the way I approached life. I stopped feeling guilty for prioritizing my needs over theirs. I started making decisions for myself, without worrying about their reactions. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone anymore. But the hardest part was the quiet. I hadn't realized how much noise they had filled my life with until they were gone. There was no one to judge my every move, no one to make me feel bad for my success. It felt like a weight had been lifted, not just from my shoulders, but from my heart. I've thought about reaching out, trying to mend things, but every time I'm tempted, I remind myself why I did it. It's not about revenge or getting back at them. It's about taking control of my life. It's about finally standing up for myself after years of putting everyone else first. In the end, I realized something important. They may be my family, but family doesn't give you the right to treat someone like an option, to take advantage of their generosity without ever offering anything in return. Family should be about respect, love, and mutual support. I had done everything I could to be there for them, but I was never going to be their doormat again. So, for now, I'm at peace with my decision. It's not easy, and it's not something I take lightly, but it's the right choice for me. Now, I want to hear your thoughts. Am I wrong for doing this? Should I have tried harder to make things work with my family? Or was this the only way? Let me know what you think. I'm 27, and until recently, I thought I understood the concept of family love. Turns out, I just hadn't seen what it looks like when love turns into mockery dressed up as support. My name's Ryan, and I'm the punchline of my family's favorite joke. Or at least, I was, until the night everything changed. I grew up in a loud, opinionated family where sarcasm was basically a love language. Sunday dinners were less about bonding and more about surviving the next roast session. My mom and dad weren't cruel exactly, but they had this way of turning every insecurity into a family anecdote. If I failed a test, it became the story of Ryan's legendary D in physics. If I dated someone who dumped me, it was that time Ryan scared off another one. You get the idea. The laughter always came at my expense, and I was expected to laugh too, because that's what family does, right? We don't take things so seriously. By the time I graduated with a psychology degree, I was already used to being the sensitive one. My dad, a contractor who built houses with his hands, always said my soft degree wouldn't build me a future. My mom would chime in with something like, well, maybe you can psychoanalyze the customers when you're waiting tables. My older brother, Luke, joined in too. He worked in finance and never missed a chance to flex his paycheck. Meanwhile, my younger sister Emma was the golden child, studying medicine, volunteering, somehow perfect at everything. So when I got invited to what my parents called a graduation party, I actually felt hopeful. They'd said they wanted to celebrate me finally finishing college. My dad even told me to wear something nice. For once, I thought maybe, just maybe, they were proud of me. When I walked into the backyard that night, though, the first thing I saw stopped me cold. There was a giant white banner hanging between two trees with bold red letters that read, "Our family's biggest disappointment," with a degree in psychology. At first, I thought it was a prank. You know, a quick laugh before the real surprise banner came out. But then everyone started clapping and laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. My uncle, my mom's brother, actually wiped a tear from his eye. He was laughing so hard. "Oh, this is perfect," he said, slapping my dad's back. "You really nailed it, Mike." I stood there frozen, holding a small gift I'd brought for my mom, a framed photo of us from when I was a kid. My stomach twisted so hard it felt like my body was trying to reject the moment. My dad shouted, "Come on, Ree. Don't look so serious. It's a joke. Lighten up, Dr. Freud." Laughter rippled again. My aunt yelled, "Maybe he can analyze why he's always so moody." Someone else shouted, "Careful, he might start charging by the hour." I wanted to disappear. Every smile in that yard looked like a blade. I caught my reflection in the sliding glass door. My polite smile looked so fake it hurt. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. So I laughed. Loud, maybe too loud. I nodded and said, "Good one." I even joked back, "Well, at least I can help all of you figure out why you need to laugh at me to feel better about your lives." That earned me another round of laughter, but it wasn't laughter with me. It was at me again, like always. Dinner wasn't much better. My mom had gone all out, buffet-style setup, balloons, even a cake shaped like a brain. The inscription said, "For the man who knows nothing about real work, but everything about feelings." My Uncle Mark kept calling me Dr. Disappointment. My brother Luke joked about sponsoring me since I'd never afford my own place on a psychologist's salary. It was humiliating. Every minute felt like a performance, and I was playing the fool. But the worst part was realizing that no one, literally no one, saw anything wrong with it. My mom smiled at me proudly, like she'd done something good. My dad kept telling guests, "We just love to tease each other." Emma, my sister, just gave me a sympathetic smile from across the table, like she pitied me but wouldn't dare intervene. When the night started to wind down, I quietly excused myself and went inside. I needed air, silence, anything. I sat in the hallway for a moment, trying to slow my breathing. Then I overheard my Uncle Mark near the kitchen saying, "Honestly, Mike, you should have gone with my idea, Ryan. Proof that participation trophies don't work." Everyone laughed again, even my mom. That's when something inside me broke, not in an angry outburst kind of way, but in a cold, surgical one. I realized I'd spent my entire life giving this family my vulnerability like it was a gift, and they kept turning it into a weapon. They mocked what they didn't understand, and I'd been their favorite target for years. But that night, something changed. I decided I wasn't going to let it slide this time. I walked back out to the patio, where most of the family was still lingering, laughing, half drunk, and loud. My dad looked at me and said, "You're not leaving already, are you?" I smiled and said, "Nah, just wanted to say bye to Uncle Mark before I go." I found him leaning against the fence, talking with two of my cousins. He raised his beer when he saw me. "Hey, Dr. Disappointment. You good, kid?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Hey, Uncle Mark, how's Aunt Laura doing these days?" His grin faltered for a split second. "She's fine," he said, a little too quickly. "Really?" I tilted my head slightly. "That's good. She didn't look too fine last week when she was leaving your neighbor's house in tears." Silence. His cousin's smiles vanished. Mark's eyes darted to them, then back to me. "What are you talking about?" he said, voice tightening. I shrugged. "Maybe I'm mistaken. Probably nothing. You know me, reading too much into things." I gave him a pat on the shoulder and added, "But I'm sure the rest of the family would love to hear about it. You know how fast word spreads." And with that, I left. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I could already feel the shift in the air, the tension, the confusion, the whisper that would turn into wildfire. That one sentence was all it would take to unravel the perfect family image they were so proud of. I didn't plan on coming back. But as it turns out, I didn't have to. Because within 2 weeks, everything started to fall apart, and it all began with that one comment at the party. The thing about families like mine is that chaos doesn't erupt all at once. It leaks through the cracks slowly, quietly, until one day everything collapses under the weight of all the fake smiles. After the party, I tried to move on. I told myself I'd just focus on my life and let them be who they were. But something strange started happening within days. My phone buzzed constantly, missed calls, group chats, sudden invitations from relatives who'd ignored me for years. It didn't take long to realize what had started it all, my Uncle Mark. Apparently, my little comment had spread faster than I expected. I didn't even say much, just enough to plant doubt, and that was all it took. Mark's wife, Aunt Laura, called my mom in tears 2 days later. My mom, being the queen of gossip, told my dad, who told Luke, who told Emma, who told her best friend. You get the idea. By the time the story came full circle, half the family was talking about Mark's affair, and the other half was debating whether I'd made it up. When I showed up at my parents' house the next weekend, I could feel the tension before I even stepped through the door. My mom was in the kitchen, whispering furiously on the phone. As soon as she saw me, she hung up and said, "Ryan, what did you say to Mark?" "Hi to you too," I said, kicking off my shoes. "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "He's been calling everyone saying you're spreading rumors about him and Laura." I leaned against the counter. "I didn't spread anything. I said something to him, not about him. If it's turning into gossip, maybe that's not my fault." She crossed her arms. "Ryan, you can't do things like that. You know how sensitive Mark is." That made me laugh, loudly. "Sensitive? Mom, he literally called me Dr. Disappointment in front of 20 people. He's sensitive." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "That was a joke, Ryan. We all joke." "Right," I said. "You joke. I get humiliated. Same pattern, just different nights." That was when my dad walked in. "What's going on here?" "Your son is stirring up family drama," Mom said, clearly trying to recruit him to her side. Dad looked at me like I was some kind of problem he had to fix. "Ryan, what's wrong with you lately? You've always been so touchy, but this is ridiculous." Something about that word, touchy, set me off. "I'm not touchy," I said, trying to stay calm. "I'm just tired of pretending it's fine when everyone treats me like a joke. That banner, the comments, all of it, it wasn't funny." He scoffed. "It was harmless." Everyone laughed. "Yeah," I said quietly, "except me." He sighed like he was talking to a child. "You really need to grow thicker skin. The world doesn't care about your feelings." I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reaches your eyes. "Yeah, I've learned that, especially from you." For a moment, the room went silent. My mom looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't. My dad grabbed his keys and muttered, "I'm not doing this today," before storming out. That was the conversation that cemented what I already knew. I wasn't part of this family anymore. I was an outsider they tolerated out of obligation. Over the next week, I started noticing the favoritism more clearly than ever. It was always there, but now it was like a spotlight had been turned on. My brother Luke came over to my parents' house one night while I was there, and they practically rolled out a red carpet for him. Dad poured him a beer, Mom cooked his favorite meal, and they spent the evening bragging about his latest promotion. When Luke talked about buying a new BMW, Dad nearly burst with pride. "That's my boy," he said, clapping Luke on the back. Meanwhile, when I mentioned that I'd landed a paid internship at a counseling center, my mom smiled politely and said, "That's nice, dear. Maybe it'll help you find a real job eventually." Luke smirked. "You mean an adult job?" I wanted to fire back, but I didn't. I just said, "You're right," and excused myself to go outside. Sitting alone on the porch, I thought about every moment that had led up to this. Every family dinner, every joke, every time I'd let it slide because I wanted to keep the peace. That night, I realized peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from boundaries, and I was finally ready to set some. The real shift started a few days later when Emma called me. She rarely called unless she wanted something, so I was already skeptical. "Hey, Ree," she said cheerfully. "So, Mom and Dad are thinking about having another family dinner this weekend. You should come." "Why?" I asked. "So I can be the entertainment again?" She hesitated. No, it's not like that. They just want to talk things out. Smooth over what happened." "Smooth over," I repeated. "So, they want me to pretend I wasn't humiliated at my own graduation party." "Ryan," she sighed. "It wasn't that bad. You know how Dad is. He jokes to show love." "That's not love," I said flatly. "That's disrespect." There was a pause. "Look," she said, lowering her voice. "I get it, okay? They've always been tough on you. But maybe if you just show them you're doing fine, they'll back off." That hit me harder than I expected. "So, the solution is to prove my worth to them?" I asked quietly. Again, she didn't answer, and that told me everything I needed to know. I didn't go to that dinner, and that's when things got worse. My mom called me the next day, furious. "You embarrassed us, Ryan. Everyone came expecting to see you." "I didn't ask for that dinner," I said calmly. "Well, you made us look bad," she snapped. "Do you realize how selfish that is?" That word again, selfish. It's funny how people who take everything from you will still find a way to call you selfish when you stop giving. By the next week, I was pretty much cut off. My parents stopped inviting me to family events. My brother stopped replying to texts. Even Emma grew distant. But that didn't mean they stopped talking about me. I started hearing from cousins. "Hey, man, your mom says you've been going through something." Or, "Your dad told me you're having trouble keeping a job." It was classic manipulation. If they couldn't control me, they'd control the story about me. But then, something unexpected happened. Aunt Laura, yes, the one who supposedly had nothing to hide, called me. Her voice was shaky. "Ryan," she said, "I need to ask you something." "What did you see that night?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure what you mean. You told Mark you saw me leaving our neighbor's house. Did you?" I didn't answer right away. "Why?" She sighed. "Because I did. But it wasn't what he thinks. I wasn't cheating. I was helping her with something personal, and he's using your comment as an excuse to make me look bad." That made me pause. "So he's blaming me?" "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "He's telling everyone you're spreading lies to get revenge for that party." And there it was, the spark. The same people who had made me the family joke were now trying to paint me as the villain. I could have let it go. I could have ignored it, moved on, tried to rebuild somewhere else. But the thing about being mocked your whole life is that eventually, you learn exactly where everyone's pressure points are. I didn't tell her the truth that night. I just listened, nodded, and said I'd think about what to do. Then I hung up, opened my laptop, and started typing. If my family wanted to keep playing their little games, they were about to learn what happens when you underestimate the disappointment with a psychology degree. Because I'd spent my whole life analyzing people like them. Every insecurity, every pattern of behavior, every secret they thought no one noticed. And I knew exactly how to make those cracks widen. That night, I made a list of everyone who had laughed at that banner. Every single one. And I started planning. The list sat on my desk for days, a wrinkled sheet of paper covered in names and notes, each one a tiny reminder of the night I stopped belonging to my own family. I didn't know exactly what I wanted yet, but I knew I wanted them to feel it. The humiliation, the isolation, the sting of being the punchline. But revenge wasn't the only thing on my mind. I also wanted answers. Why did they treat me that way? Why did my parents, the people who were supposed to lift me up, take such joy in tearing me down? Before I could decide how to start, though, my family made the next move. It started on a Thursday morning when my boss, the director of the counseling center where I'd just started interning, called me into her office. "Ryan," she said, closing the door gently, "I received a concerning email about you." My stomach dropped. "What kind of email?" She turned her computer screen toward me. It was an anonymous message claiming that I was emotionally unstable and unfit to handle clients responsibly. It went on to say that I'd been asked to leave my family's home after violent outbursts and struggled with delusions. My mouth went dry. I could feel heat building in my face as I read it. None of that's true," I said finally, my voice shaking. "I know," she said calmly. "I told the board as much. But we still have to investigate. Until it's resolved, I'll have to limit your client contact." Limit. That meant I'd be doing admin work instead of what I actually loved, talking to people, helping them. It was humiliating, and worse, it was familiar. The same pattern again. Someone sabotaging me while pretending it was for my own good. I left work that day with one goal: find out who sent it. I didn't have to look far. That night, I called Emma. "Do you know anything about an email sent to my boss?" There was a pause, long enough for me to know she did. "Ryan, It was you," I said. "No," she snapped. "Not me. But Mom mentioned something about trying to get through to you. She said you were shutting everyone out and maybe needed help before you hurt yourself." I sat there in silence. My own mother, the same woman who had told me to grow thicker skin, was now spreading rumors that I was mentally unstable. She told people I was dangerous? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think she just exaggerated," Emma said quickly. "She didn't mean harm. She ruined my job." I cut in. "That's harm, Emma." There was another pause. "Ryan, please don't make this worse. Mom's been under a lot of stress." I hung up. For the next few days, I couldn't eat or sleep. I kept replaying every moment of that night in my head. Her smile at the party, the way she laughed when they mocked me, the way she'd said, "It's just a joke." It all made sense now. To her, I wasn't a person, I was a project, something she could fix or control. But the betrayal wasn't over yet. A week later, I got a text from my dad. "We need to talk. Family meeting. Be at the house at 6. I almost didn't go, but part of me wanted to see how far they'd go, how deep the knife would twist. When I walked into the living room, everyone was already there. Mom, Dad, Luke, and Emma. Even Uncle Mark was sitting on the couch, his face unreadable. My mom started. "Ryan, we're worried about you." I laughed, an actual laugh this time, sharp and bitter. "Worried about me? You're the one spreading rumors that I'm crazy." Her face tightened. "I didn't spread rumors. I told a few people I'm concerned for your well-being. That's what families do when someone's struggling." "Struggling?" I repeated. "I was fine until you decided to turn my life into a pity campaign." Dad cut in. "Watch your tone, son." "No," I said, standing up. "You don't get to call me son after what you did." Luke scoffed. "You're being dramatic." Mom was trying to help. "Help?" I said, my voice cracking. "By lying to my boss. By making me look like I'm unhinged? That's not help. That's sabotage." Mom's eyes were glossy now, the way they always got when she wanted to play victim. "Ryan, I only did what any mother would do. You've been distant, angry. I've been disrespected," I snapped. "You humiliated me in front of the whole family, and when I finally stood up for myself, you decided to ruin my career." Dad leaned forward, his voice low. "You're out of line." "No," I said again, feeling something inside me finally click into place. For the first time in my life, I'm in line. I'm seeing this family for what it is. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "All right, maybe we should calm down." I turned to him. "You should probably stay quiet, Mark. I wouldn't want your neighbor to overhear." His face went pale, and the room went dead silent. Dad stood up, his jaw tight. "That's enough. You come into my house, disrespect your mother, your uncle, your house." I said quietly, "Right, it's yours. Everything's yours. The house, the the stories, the control. Mom looked at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. "Ryan, what happened to you?" "What happened," I said, "is that I stopped trying to make people love me by letting them hurt me." For a second, I thought she might actually understand. But then she said the one thing that broke something permanent inside me. "You've always been the problem, Ryan. Even when you were a kid. You just can't handle a little tough love." That was it. The sentence that flipped a switch. I didn't yell, didn't throw anything, didn't storm out. I just looked at her and said, "You'll regret saying that." Then I walked out the door. I thought that would be the end of it. I figured I'd just cut them off for good. But families like mine don't let you leave quietly. 2 days later, I got an email, not from my boss this time, but from the counseling board itself. It said my internship was under review pending verification of mental health allegations. Attached was a document, a written statement from my mother, signed and dated. In it, she claimed I'd shown concerning behavior, including fits of anger, paranoia, and a tendency toward delusional thinking. She even wrote that she feared for her safety when I came over. I sat there, staring at the words, my hands shaking. My own mother had signed her name to something that could destroy my future. And yet, beneath the shock, something colder started to form, a quiet, precise kind of rage. Not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that plans. Because in trying to break me, they'd finally given me everything I needed. Proof, motive, and a reason to act. That night, I tore up the list on my desk and wrote a new one, not of people, but of moves. Step 1, collect evidence. Step 2, make them believe it's all falling apart naturally. Step 3, when the time comes, let them destroy themselves. And I already knew where to start. After I read that statement, my own mother's signature staring back at me like a final betrayal, I didn't cry. Not a single tear. I just sat there in silence for a long time, feeling something inside me go completely still. I think there's a moment when you realize you can't go back, that the version of you who used to forgive and explain and hope is gone for good. That's what happened to me that night. Ryan, the family punching bag, was dead. The next few weeks were a blur. I was suspended from my internship while the board verified the allegations. My supervisor was kind. She didn't believe my mom's letter, but procedure is procedure. My rent started piling up. I picked up shifts at a coffee shop near the university just to stay afloat, but every time I handed someone a latte, I felt that sting again. The humiliation, the disbelief that my own mother had sabotaged me like that. Worse, the rest of the family went quiet. Dead quiet. It's strange how silence can feel louder than words. No calls, no texts, no apologies. They'd made their narrative. I was unstable, lashing out, cutting contact. It made them feel justified, like I was proving their point. For a while, I believed it too. I'd wake up in the middle of the night replaying that meeting at their house, my mom's voice saying I was the problem. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was broken. Maybe I'd spent so long analyzing everyone else that I couldn't see my own flaws. But then one night, I got a message from Emma. A single line. I didn't know she sent that letter. I'm sorry. I almost ignored it. But something in me softened, just a little. I asked her to meet me, and we met at this small diner we used to go to as kids. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hands shaking slightly as she held her coffee. She said you were out of control, Emma whispered. She told us you were yelling, breaking things, threatening her. She said you needed help. I just stared at her. And you believed her? She looked down. I didn't want to, but she sounded scared. That hurt more than anything. She lied, Emma. She wanted to scare everyone into siding with her. That's what she does, controls people with sympathy. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I know. I see it now. She's been calling me nonstop, asking what you're saying about her. She's terrified you'll ruin her reputation. I let out a bitter laugh. Good. She should be. That meeting changed everything. It was the first time someone in my family, anyone, had seen through my mother's act. And it gave me something I hadn't felt in months, clarity. Over the next few weeks, I started to rebuild. Quietly, patiently. I moved out of my tiny apartment into a shared place closer to the city. My roommate, Aaron, was a fellow counselor in training. Calm, logical, the kind of person who listens more than he speaks. I told him bits and pieces about what happened, and he just said, "You can't change your family, man. But you can change the way they affect you." That stuck with me. So, I did something I hadn't done in years. I focused on myself. I spent my mornings running by the river, listening to podcasts about resilience and psychology. I picked up extra shifts at the cafe, started saving money, even enrolled in an online course about trauma recovery. The irony wasn't lost on me. A guy accused of being unstable learning how to help others heal. It took 3 months for the board to clear me. They concluded there was no evidence of the behavior described. I got reinstated immediately. My supervisor gave me a smile when she told me the news. "I'm glad you didn't give up," she said. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted them to think I'd vanished into failure. That was the beauty of it. The less they knew, the more control I had. Around that time, I started posting online under a pseudonym, short essays about family dynamics, gaslighting, narcissistic parents. I wrote about how love can disguise itself as mockery and how harmless jokes can turn into emotional control. I didn't name anyone, but people resonated with it. One post went semi-viral, and within weeks, I had a small following. People were sharing their stories with me. Siblings cut off, parents guilt-tripping them, whole families built on silence and shame. It felt validating. That's when I realized something. My mother had spent her life controlling people through her version of the story. But now, I had something she couldn't touch, a voice that wasn't bound to her approval. I started freelancing as a mental health writer, then got hired part-time to help run workshops at the center. By the end of that year, I was doing well, better than I ever had, actually. I'd gone from nearly losing everything to building something that mattered. And then, one day, fate handed me an opportunity. Emma called again. She sounded nervous. "Ryan, I don't know if I should tell you this, but Mom's planning something big." "What do you mean?" "She's organizing a family reunion in a few weeks. Says it's to make peace," but Emma hesitated. "I think she's trying to fix her image. She invited everyone. Uncles, cousins, even people from church." I felt my jaw tighten. "And she wants me there?" "She said she's going to extend an olive branch. But knowing her, it's more like a PR stunt." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining it. The same backyard, the same laughter, the same faces. Only this time, I wasn't walking in as the joke. I decided I'd go. Not to forgive, not to fight, but to observe. To see how deep her performance ran. And maybe, if the opportunity presented itself, to pull one string and let her web unravel in front of everyone. In the weeks leading up to the reunion, I prepared. Not in an obvious way. I wasn't plotting dramatic speeches or revenge reveals. My plan was slower, quieter. I gathered everything. Screenshots of her emails, the signed statement she'd sent, old text messages where she twisted my words. I compiled it all into a private folder, neatly organized. Meanwhile, my life kept improving. The counseling center promoted me to a full-time position. My writing took off. I was invited to give a short talk about toxic family patterns at a local seminar. When I walked on stage and saw 100 faces looking back at me, listening to my words, I realized something beautiful. I'd taken the pain they gave me and turned it into power. But success doesn't stay hidden for long. One day, out of nowhere, I got a text from my dad. "Proud of you, son. Saw your article online." I stared at the screen for a long time. He'd found me. Then came another text. "Your mom wants to talk. She says she regrets everything." For a second, I almost laughed. Regrets? Or reputation damage control? Still, I agreed to meet her. Not out of forgiveness, but curiosity. We met at a cafe, neutral ground. She looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was age, or maybe it was guilt, but her confidence seemed chipped. "Ryan," she said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I want to fix things between us." I just watched her, waiting for the catch. "I know I hurt you," she said, reaching across the table. "I just didn't know how to handle you. You were always so sensitive, and I thought if I toughened you up, you'd survive better in the world. I see now that I went too far." Her words might have worked on me once, but not anymore. "Mom," I said quietly, "you didn't toughen me up. You taught me to tolerate disrespect." She flinched slightly, but recovered with a trembling smile. "That's fair. I just want us to move forward, especially before the reunion." There it was. The real reason. "You mean before everyone sees through you?" I said. Her smile froze. "Ryan, please, don't ruin this for the family. Everyone's looking forward to it." I leaned back, studying her. "You know, it's funny. You always said family sticks together. But that only works when the glue isn't made of lies." Her face hardened. I'm trying, Ryan. I nodded. So am I. When I left that cafe, I didn't feel angry. I felt focused. Because now I understood something crucial. My mother wasn't just toxic. She was desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. And the reunion? That was the perfect stage. The day of the reunion felt like walking back into the past. Except this time, I wasn't the same person who used to beg for their approval. I was no longer the quiet kid in the corner laughing at jokes that hurt. I was composed, deliberate, and armed with something my family never valued: patience. The house looked almost exactly as it had during that party. Same backyard, same folding tables covered in mismatched tablecloths, same grills sizzling under the afternoon sun. My mom was moving between guests with that practiced smile she wore like a mask, her voice overly bright. So glad you could make it. Oh, yes, we've missed everyone so much. I stood near the fence, half in the shade, watching her work the crowd. My dad was by the grill, holding court with a group of uncles. He spotted me and waved like nothing had ever happened. There he is, the man of the hour. I smiled thinly. Didn't realize I was the theme again. He laughed, missing the edge in my voice. No banners this time, I promise. I scanned the tables. My brother Luke was there, laughing with cousins. Emma gave me a small nod from across the yard. She knew what I was doing, or at least, she suspected. We'd talked briefly the night before, and she'd said, "Just don't destroy them completely, okay?" I hadn't made any promises. The reunion wasn't huge, maybe 30 people. Enough to form a crowd, enough to make gossip travel fast. My plan wasn't about yelling or exposing anyone in a dramatic explosion. It was about truth, slow, undeniable, and public. Halfway through the afternoon, my mom called for attention. "Everyone," she said, raising a glass. "I just want to say how grateful I am to have all of you here. Family is everything." People clapped. I felt my jaw tighten. She continued, "We've had some rough times lately, but what matters is forgiveness. We've all made mistakes." She glanced at me then, all gentle eyes and false humility. "But family sticks together, right?" There was polite laughter and murmurs of agreement. That's when I stepped forward. "Can I say something?" All eyes turned to me. My mom froze for a split second before recovering. "Of course, Ryan." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "You're right, Mom. Family should stick together. But sticking together means being honest, not pretending." There was a ripple of confusion. My dad frowned. "Ryan, let's not." I raised a hand. "I just want to share something. I've spent the past year working at a counseling center, helping people rebuild their lives after trauma. And one thing I've learned is that sometimes the people who hurt you the most don't look like villains. They look like the ones hosting the reunion." The air shifted instantly, quiet, heavy, expectant. My mom forced a smile. "Honey, this isn't really the time." I pulled out my phone, my tone calm and measured. "Actually, it is. Because you always said I should stop living in the past. So I did. I stopped reliving the pain, and I started documenting it instead." I tapped the screen, projecting a folder of documents onto the TV behind me, the one they'd set up for a family slideshow. On the screen, her letter appeared, the one she'd sent to my internship board. Gasps filled the yard. My mom's face drained of color. "Ryan, what is this?" "It's your handwriting," I said evenly. "And your signature. You claimed I was unstable, that I'd hurt you, that I was dangerous." My dad looked between us, confused and furious. "What is this, Laura?" she stammered. I only did it to protect him. I thought." I interrupted gently. "You thought you'd control me by ruining me. Classic tactic. It's in a lot of the case studies I teach." Someone whispered, "She sent that to his job?" I nodded. "Yes, and it cost me months of my life. But don't worry," I added, turning toward the guests. "The board cleared me. Turns out, truth holds up better than gossip." My mom reached for me, panic flashing in her eyes. "Ryan, please stop. You're humiliating me." I met her gaze. "You humiliated me first. I'm just returning the courtesy, publicly, so it's fair." Luke stood up suddenly. "This isn't right. You're making Mom look bad." I turned to him. "No, Luke. She made herself look bad. I'm just showing everyone the parts she didn't want them to see." Aunt Laura looked like she wanted to disappear. Uncle Mark was staring at the ground, knowing I could ruin him too if I wanted. I didn't even have to say anything. The fear in his eyes was enough. Then I took a breath and said, "But I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm here to make something clear. I'm done being your family's scapegoat. I'm done laughing at the jokes. I'm done letting your shame become my silence. No yelling. No theatrics. Just truth. Clean, sharp, and final. I closed the folder and slipped my phone back into my pocket. The silence that followed was deafening. My mom whispered, "You don't understand how much you've just embarrassed me." I looked at her, calm and steady. "You don't understand how much you've already embarrassed yourself." And then I turned and walked away, not storming off this time, but walking like a man who'd already won. Behind me, voices broke out, arguments, whispers, someone crying. My dad shouted, "Laura, what did you do?" Emma called my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't need to. The truth had done what I couldn't for years. It spoke louder than me. When I reached my car, I leaned against it for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air. The sun was setting, washing the yard in gold and orange. It looked almost peaceful, like nothing had happened. But I knew that by tomorrow, half the family would be calling the other half, replaying every word, every look, every gasp. And my mom, the woman who built her identity on reputation, would finally know what it felt like to have it crumble in public. But revenge isn't just about destruction. It's about balance. And for the first time in my life, the scales felt even. Still, I wasn't done. Because what happened next, in the days after that reunion, would prove that even when the truth sets you free, some people can't handle what freedom looks like. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No yelling, no frantic apologies, no desperate phone calls that night. Just silence. A cold, echoing silence that seemed to stretch across every room of that house long after I'd driven away. But by the next morning, the calls started coming. Not to me, though. To each other. Family group chats were exploding. Cousins who hadn't spoken in years were suddenly swapping theories, screenshots, and half-remembered stories. The cracks that had been invisible for decades were now wide open, and for the first time, everyone could see what had been festering underneath all that family pride. My phone stayed silent. I didn't need to say another word. The truth had already started working on its own. 3 days later, Emma showed up at my apartment. I barely recognized her at first. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "You need to know what's happening," she said, sitting down without asking. Apparently, after I left the reunion, everything collapsed within hours. My dad demanded to know if the letter was real. My mom tried to deny it until my uncle, the same one who'd laughed the loudest at my humiliation, confirmed he'd seen her typing it weeks earlier. That started an argument so bad that neighbors called the police for a domestic disturbance. No one was arrested, but the fight didn't stop there. The next day, my dad packed a bag and left. By the weekend, my mom's church group had heard about the letter, too. Someone had recorded part of my speech on their phone. It was already making rounds in their small social circle. The woman who'd once boasted about her perfect family now couldn't show her face without whispers following her like shadows. "Ryan," Emma said quietly, "she's been calling me nonstop, crying, saying you ruined her life." I stared at the wall for a moment before answering. "No," I said. "She ruined her own life. I just stopped cleaning up the mess." Emma didn't argue. She just nodded, eyes glossy with something between guilt and relief. As the days turned into weeks, the fallout spread. My dad moved into an apartment downtown. I think he was embarrassed more than anything. Embarrassed that he'd defended her all those years. Embarrassed that he'd raised someone he couldn't control. He tried to reach out once, sent me a text that just said, "You really hurt your mother." I didn't respond. Luke, on the other hand, took the silence personally. He called one night, angry and slurring his words. "You think you're some kind of hero now? You humiliated all of us." "I didn't humiliate anyone," I said calmly. "I told the truth. You just don't like how it looks under daylight." "You're pathetic," he spat. "You think your little therapy job makes you better than us?" "No," I said. "It just makes me free." He hung up after that, but I could hear something in his voice. That same tremor I'd heard from my mom before, when control slipped through her fingers. The family power structure they'd built around shame and silence had collapsed, and none of them knew how to function without it. I thought that would be the end of it, a slow drift into distance, maybe a few more angry texts before the quiet settled for good. But a month later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. From my mother. The envelope was neat, her handwriting as careful as ever. Inside was a single page that began with, "I don't expect forgiveness." She went on to say she didn't understand why she'd done what she did. That maybe she'd been jealous, maybe scared that I'd become something she never could. She said she'd always wanted to be seen as the strong one, the mother who kept everyone in line. But when I started standing on my own, she felt irrelevant. At the bottom, she wrote, "You took away my voice." But maybe it was never really mine. I read that line 5 times before folding the letter back up. I didn't reply. Some wounds don't need closure. They just need distance. The months that followed were strangely peaceful. I focused on work, on my writing, on rebuilding a life that wasn't built around surviving people who claimed to love me. My essays gained traction online, and eventually I was invited to speak at a national conference about family toxicity and resilience. When I stood on that stage, looking out at hundreds of people, I realized something that made me almost laugh. Everything they'd mocked me for, my soft degree, my sensitivity, my need to understand people, had become the thing that saved me. The same psychology they ridiculed had taught me how to see through them. After the talk, a woman came up to me and said, "You're so lucky. You got out." I smiled. "It wasn't luck," I said. "It was clarity." A few months later, I heard through Emma that my mom had started seeing a therapist. Apparently, it was court-ordered after she'd had a breakdown during one of her church meetings. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Luke stopped showing up to family events altogether. He'd become bitter, isolated, and I think deep down he knew he'd backed the wrong person for too long. My dad tried to reconcile with her once, but couldn't get past what she'd done. The house was sold soon after, the same one where every holiday had turned into a battlefield disguised as a dinner table. The perfect family image my mom had spent decades curating was gone, not because I destroyed it, but because it was never real to begin with. It was a performance, and I just turned on the lights. Emma and I stayed in touch. She still struggled with guilt for not speaking up sooner, but I told her the truth. You can't save people who don't think they need saving. You can only walk away. And I had. A year later, I visited that old neighborhood again, not for nostalgia, just curiosity. The house had a new coat of paint and a different car in the driveway. I parked across the street and watched for a while, the air warm and quiet. Kids were playing nearby, laughing, the kind of laughter that didn't sting. I realized, in that moment, that I wasn't angry anymore, not even bitter. What I felt was something closer to peace, because the real revenge wasn't the public humiliation or the chaos that followed. The real revenge was living a life they couldn't touch, thriving in a peace they could never understand. Before leaving, I looked at that house one last time and said under my breath, "You made me stronger than you ever meant to." And for the first time in years, I actually believed it. I drove away with the windows down, the wind in my hair, no destination in mind, just forward. That was the last time I ever saw that house. Or them. And honestly, that was the happiest I'd ever been. My name's Eric, I'm 29, and I guess you could say I've always been the background character in my own family. You know the type, not the black sheep exactly, more like the invisible one. The guy who remembers every birthday, sends flowers on Mother's Day, helps with moving day, lends tools, and quietly picks up the tab when Dad forgets his wallet. I'm not flashy. I'm not the loud one. I'm the dependable one. And maybe that's why it took me so long to realize I was being used. Or worse, excluded. It started small. A missed invite here, a forgotten group chat there. "Oh, you didn't get the text? I thought someone told you." But I let it slide. Because that's what you do when you love people, right? You assume the best. You give the benefit of the doubt. You don't let your insecurities speak for you. But sometimes, silence is just the sound of someone trying not to cry in front of a dozen people wearing matching shirts you didn't even know existed. The baby shower was for my niece, Ellie. Well, technically she's my cousin's daughter, but we've always called each other aunt and uncle in this sprawling, tangled family tree. I showed up with a carefully wrapped gift, a hand-knitted blanket I'd commissioned from a woman at the farmer's market who did custom embroidery. Ellie's name was stitched in soft lavender script across the corner. I was proud of it. Felt like I'd finally nailed a thoughtful, personal gift. The venue was a rented garden patio behind a quaint little cafe. String lights, mason jar centerpieces, pastel streamers fluttering in the breeze. Everyone was already there when I arrived. I spotted my sister, Jen, by the drink table, talking animatedly to her cousin Rachel. I waved. Jen gave me the kind of wave you give a mailman, brief, distant, almost performative. Still, I smiled, kept it polite. I signed the guest book, handed over the blanket, and made small talk with the few relatives who actually remembered my name without prompting. It wasn't until halfway through the afternoon, as I helped one of the older uncles balance a paper plate of mini quiches that I brought up the picnic. Looking forward to the family picnic next weekend, I said casually. I took the day off work. My Uncle Dave, who's always been the gruff but lovable type, let out a low chuckle. Oh, that was yesterday. I blinked. What? He tilted his head at me, as if trying to gauge whether I was joking or just clueless. Didn't anyone tell you? I just stood there. My mouth opened, then closed. I scanned the nearby faces. Some avoided eye contact. Others, like my cousin Maddie, just looked at me with pity. And then came the final gut punch. My cousin Nate, who I used to babysit when he was 6, pulled out his phone and turned it around to show me a group photo. There they all were. Matching navy blue shirts with Family Picnic 2025 in white cursive across the chest. Grinning faces, folding chairs, a massive picnic cake shaped like a watermelon slice. Everyone. Mom, Dad, Jen, even Great Aunt Louisa, who hasn't left her house in 2 years. I swallowed hard. Oh, I managed to say, forcing a chuckle that sounded as brittle as dried leaves. Then Jen walked by. She glanced at the photo and said with that smug little half-smile I've come to loathe, it was kinda a close family thing. I turned to her, stunned. I am close family. She raised an eyebrow. Sure, but you know what I mean. No, Jen. I really didn't. I excused myself a few minutes later. Pretended I had to take a call, then just walked to my car. The whole drive home, my hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly I could see the whites of my knuckles. My head buzzed with questions I'd asked myself a dozen times before but never dared say aloud. Was I just boring? Had I done something to offend someone? Did they even notice I wasn't there? But somewhere between the freeway exit and my apartment parking lot, something in me clicked. Not snapped, this wasn't rage. It was quieter than that. Cooler. Like a fog finally lifting. I realized something vital that day. It wasn't that they forgot me. It was that they deliberately chose not to include me. And worse, they didn't even feel the need to hide it anymore. I sat in the parking lot for almost an hour, staring at my phone, scrolling through old messages, group texts, Facebook posts, calendar invites. Everything from the past few months started to make a horrifying sort of sense. The birthday dinner I'd never been told about. The group vacation they'd already booked by the time they mentioned it to me. The sudden coldness from people I used to be close with. It wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. And I was done pretending not to notice. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled out a notebook. I made a list, names, obligations, favors, the quiet ways I'd been propping up this family like an unpaid intern. Dad's car insurance? Auto-drafted from my account. Mom's streaming subscriptions? On my family plan. Jen's dog? I'd walked it every weekend for months when she was too busy. Cousin Ryan's job application? I'd rewritten his entire resume. I wasn't just forgotten. I was being used. And suddenly, I didn't feel like being useful anymore. I started with the little things. Quiet moves. Subtle. I removed a few shared accounts. Changed my Netflix password. Took myself off the family phone plan I'd been subsidizing since college. Nobody noticed. Not yet. But they would. Then came the bigger things. I pulled out the spreadsheet I'd kept of all the bills I'd paid over the years, the things I'd told myself didn't matter. And I drafted a few polite but firm emails. Not angry. Just professional. Detached. And then I made one final decision. Something personal. Something symbolic. The kind of move that would say everything I'd never said out loud. The next family event was only a week away, Ellie's christening. Formal. Church. Reception after. I was on the guest list this time, surprisingly. Probably because I still had the nicer camera and they wanted decent photos. I RSVP'd yes. Smiled. Played along. But what I had planned for that day, let's just say it ensured no one would ever forget me again. And that's where things really got interesting. The morning of Ellie's christening was bright and cloudless, the kind of spring day you only get a few times a year. The church was one of those old stone ones with stained glass windows and tall archways that made your footsteps echo. I arrived early, dressed in a sharp gray suit, the same one I'd worn to my cousin's wedding 2 years ago, the one I'd photographed for free because they couldn't afford a professional. I brought the camera, of course. Wouldn't want to break tradition. Inside, the pews were filling quickly. I saw Jen near the front, whispering something to Mom and snickering. Dad caught my eye and gave me a curt nod. No smile. No warmth. Just acknowledgement, like I was the doorman at a hotel he barely recognized. I walked past them all and took a seat near the aisle. where I'd have a clear shot for photos, because even when they excluded me, I still knew how to play the part. But this time, I wasn't there just to take pictures. The service went smoothly. Ellie cried a bit when the priest poured the water over her head, but everyone cooed and clapped as if it were the climax of a Broadway show. I snapped a few shots, more out of habit than anything else. But while everyone was focused on the altar, I kept glancing at the front row. Jen, Mom, Dad, Cousin Rachel, Aunt Marie, all laughing, whispering, elbowing one another like they were in on some shared joke. I wasn't laughing. I was memorizing. After the ceremony, everyone headed to the church hall for the reception. It was modest, but well decorated. White tablecloths, flower centerpieces, a long buffet table lined with finger sandwiches, deviled eggs, and tiny cupcakes with pink frosting. The gift table was already overflowing. Someone had brought a giant plush elephant that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. I walked in with a canvas bag over my shoulder and a carefully wrapped box in my hand. I placed the box gently among the other gifts, then moved to the side of the room where the slideshow was looping: baby bump photos, gender reveal parties, maternity shoots. My sister walked by me with a plate of food and muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Try not to be awkward this time." I didn't even look at her. I just smiled and said, "Don't worry. I won't be invisible much longer." Her brow furrowed slightly, but she kept walking. Maybe she thought I was joking, or bitter, or just tired. But I meant every word. As everyone settled into their seats and the buffet line thinned out, the host, my cousin Rachel, stood up and clinked her glass for attention. "We want to thank everyone for coming today to celebrate sweet baby Ellie," she said, beaming. "We've had so much love and support, and we're just so grateful to all of you." Polite applause, smiling faces. I stood by the edge of the room, near the light switch. My fingers were already wrapped around the small remote I had in my pocket, one I'd synced to my laptop the night before. Rachel continued, "And now, we'd love to share a short video tribute to all the people who made this possible, our amazing family. Some of you might recognize a few faces." She gestured to the projector, and the slideshow faded to black. That's when my version began. At first, people didn't notice the difference. It started with a few innocent photos, family cookouts, birthdays, old reunions. But then, the captions changed. 4th of July 2023, everyone invited, except Eric. Mom's birthday dinner. We thought you were busy. Family picnic 2025. Didn't anyone tell you? Each slide was time-stamped, dated, labeled. I'd pulled the screenshots from Facebook, texts, even that stupid family WhatsApp group I'd been removed from without explanation. The room began to shift. You could feel it. People craning their necks, whispering, glancing nervously toward Jen and Mom and Dad. Then came the real kicker. A slide that simply read, "A running tab," followed by a spreadsheet. Itemized. Every expense, every favor, every small thing I'd paid for or contributed over the years, from Christmas dinners to loan repayments I never asked to be returned. Each row ended with a short note. Never reimbursed. Never thanked. By the time the total flashed on screen, the room was dead silent. $11,700. I let it hang there. No music. No voiceover. Just cold numbers and a room full of people choking on awkwardness. The final slide was a photo of me, smiling, holding a birthday cake. Alone. The caption read, "Don't worry. I brought my own party." Then the screen faded to black. I stepped forward, the remote still in my hand. My voice was calm. Too calm, maybe. "Thank you for watching. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't forgotten this time." You could have heard a pin drop. Mom stood up, her face pale. "Eric, what was that?" I looked right at her. That was the truth. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. Jen just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. I turned to Rachel and handed her a USB. "That has all the original photos and files. Feel free to delete them. Or keep them. Up to you." Then I picked up my canvas bag and started walking toward the door. People were whispering again. Except this time, it wasn't about how I was always late or too quiet. It was about what they'd just seen. About what they'd ignored. About what they'd allowed. Jen followed me out, her heels clicking angrily on the tile. "That was messed up, Eric. You humiliated the whole family." I stopped just outside the door and turned to her. "No, Jen." I reminded the family. "There's a difference." She crossed her arms. "What are you even trying to prove?" I took a breath. The kind you take before closing a door you know won't reopen. That I was here. That I mattered. That I'm done being the guy everyone remembers after the party's over. And then I left. But that wasn't the end. Not even close. Because what happened next? What happened after that video? That was when the real fallout began. When the calls started. When the story started unraveling. When secrets got dragged out of the dark. And that's where things went from awkward to explosive. I didn't go home right away. I drove around the city with the windows down, letting the spring air hit my face, letting it cool the quiet storm inside me. I wasn't angry, not in the way I used to be. Not the simmering kind of resentment that ate away at me in silence. No, what I felt now was something clearer, sharper. A strange kind of peace that only comes after a long overdue confrontation. I'd finally said it, without shouting, without begging, without hoping someone would understand. I'd laid it all out and walked away. On my terms. But peace has a way of shaking people who thrive on control. By the time I got back to my apartment, I had 9 missed calls. 2 from Mom. 1 from Dad. 4 from Jen. 1 from Rachel. 1 unknown number that I was pretty sure was Aunt Marie trying to disguise her call. I let them go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear excuses or tears or guilt trips. Not yet. Then the group chat was reborn. Yes, the same family group chat I'd been silently removed from 6 months earlier. Apparently, someone decided now would be the perfect time to re-add me. The notification popped up while I was making tea. You've been added to family. The first message came from Jen. Okay, well. That slideshow was completely out of line. This was a baby's christening, not your therapy session. Then Mom chimed in. Eric, honey, that was extremely hurtful. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. Couldn't you have just spoken to us privately? Rachel, I get that you're upset, but airing all that at a baby shower? Not cool. And then came Dad. Grow up. That was it. Just those 2 words. Grow up. No explanation. No apology. Just the man who let me cover his car repairs without a thank you telling me I needed to mature. For a moment, I stared at my phone. I was almost tempted to reply. To write a long, carefully worded essay breaking down every year of silent resentment, every moment of being passed over, every favor and smile I'd given freely, only to be dismissed like a seat filler at their lives. But then I realized no amount of words would matter. They'd already decided who I was. Quiet Eric. Helpful Eric. The guy who never says no. The guy they only noticed when they needed something or when he dared to speak up. So I didn't respond. I left the group. That's when the text messages started rolling in, each more frantic than the last. Jen tried again. You made your point. Can you stop now? You're making it worse. Mom's came next. You've always been dramatic, but this is too much. We were just trying to protect you from feeling out of place. Protect me? From my own family? And then Rachel, in her usual soft approach, maybe you could come over for dinner and we can talk? Just us. I ignored them all. I didn't want a half-hearted sit-down dinner where someone microwaved store-brand lasagna and pretended like it could soak up decades of neglect. I didn't want the weak smiles or the defensive jokes or the quick pivots to "can't we just move on?" Because I wasn't moving on. Not yet. 3 days later, the real shift happened. It began with a call from my old coworker, Sam. Dude, he said, why is your sister asking about your job? What? She DM'd me on LinkedIn. Said she was concerned you were acting out and wanted to know if everything was okay at work. She asked if your mental health had been affecting your projects lately. I froze. She what? Sam sighed. I didn't say anything. But, man, that's cold. Jen had never even visited my office. Never asked about my job unless she needed help making her resume look good. But now she was reaching out to my coworkers, trying to spin the narrative before I had the chance. That same night, I checked Facebook. The family was in damage control mode. Rachel had posted a long, heartfelt caption with a photo from the christening conveniently cropped to exclude the slideshow incident. Family is everything. We may not be perfect, but we show up. And sometimes, people lash out when they feel left out. Let's all remember to love each other through the hard times. The comment section was a minefield of passive-aggressive pity, praying for your strength, Rachel. Some people just need attention. You're the bigger person. Keep being you. I didn't comment. I didn't even like it. But I screenshotted every last word. You see, what my family had never realized was that being quiet doesn't mean being clueless. That just because I wasn't the loudest voice in the room didn't mean I wasn't paying attention, watching, listening, remembering. So while they scrambled to rewrite the story, to paint me as unstable or bitter or selfish, I started preparing the next step. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but clarity, a kind of quiet justice. I started collecting receipts, not just emotional ones, real ones. Bank statements, Venmo transactions, email threads, text messages, every favor, every cent, every moment where I'd stepped up and been treated like a doormat in return. And then something unexpected happened. Ellie's mother, Rachel's sister, Sophie, called me. We hadn't talked in months, maybe a year, but she sounded different, hesitant, like someone who'd seen a building catch fire and wasn't sure if she should scream or grab a bucket. "Eric," she said softly, "I just wanted to say I saw what happened. And I'm sorry." I blinked. "You are." I wasn't part of that picnic. I wasn't invited either. Jen said it was just a small thing. But when I saw that slideshow, I realized how long you've been dealing with this. I didn't know what to say. It was the first time anyone had actually acknowledged it out loud. "There are more people than you think," she continued, "who've been pushed out, forgotten. You're not the only one." That stuck with me. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about me. It wasn't just one ignored birthday or one family photo I wasn't in. It was a pattern, a family culture, one that picked favorites and discarded the rest like leftovers in the back of the fridge. I'd simply been the one to finally say something. And now? Now people were watching. I started getting messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. An old uncle who lived 2 states away. Even my godmother, who said she hadn't come to family gatherings in years because of the way they treated people like you. Every message strengthened my resolve. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was the mirror they'd spent years avoiding, and now that I'd held it up, they were scrambling to shatter it. And that's when I knew I hadn't gone far enough. What came next? That was the part that truly made sure no one ever forgot me again. But if you want to hear what I did next, and how the family's image of perfection completely imploded, just let me know. Because that is where the real fireworks started. I took a full week to disappear. Not from the world, just from them. I stopped responding to messages, muted the family members still blowing up my phone, and let the dust settle while they tore each other apart trying to assign blame. Jen tried calling me 6 more times. Mom left 2 long voicemails full of fake concern, thinly disguised as emotional blackmail. This family has been through so much, Eric. Don't throw it away over a misunderstanding. My favorite was Dad's blunt message. "You embarrassed your mother. Fix it." I didn't fix anything. I went quiet because I was working, planning. Not a tantrum, not an outburst, but a full, calm, calculated reckoning. You see, I knew my family well enough to predict exactly how they'd behave. They'd try to discredit me, smear me quietly behind the scenes, patch up their image publicly while calling me unstable in private. But I had something they never expected: documentation. Remember that spreadsheet from the slideshow? That was just the tip of the iceberg. I pulled every receipt, every email I'd sent to help Rachel's husband land his first job after his DUI. Every time I transferred money to help Mom with unexpected bills. The years of payments for Dad's car insurance. The time I bailed Jen out of a credit card hole so deep she had 3 collectors calling her in 1 week. They never even said thank you. Not once. I compiled it all into a neat, clean, factual document. No insults. No accusations. Just truth. A timeline. A pattern. And for each line, I added a short quote or message they'd sent at the time. Messages that showed the imbalance. "Eric, can you just do this one thing? You're always so helpful. Nobody else has the time." At the end of the document, I wrote only this. I did all of this not because I had to, but because I thought I was part of a family. I see now that I was just a resource. I'm no longer available for that role. Consider this my resignation letter from the unpaid position of family doormat. Then I uploaded it to a shared Google Drive, and I sent it to everyone. Not just the core family group. I sent it to the extended family too. The cousins, the aunts, the uncles, even the ones who hadn't spoken to me in years. Especially them. I included a simple email header, in case anyone's curious why I won't be at the next close family gathering. That was it. The response was swift. It started small. A few texts from extended cousins I barely remembered. Messages like, "Damn, I had no idea," or "This explains so much." One even said, "You just wrote what half the family's been thinking for years." Then came the fallout. Mom called again, this time angry. Furious, even. "How dare you air our private affairs to everyone?" That was family business. I calmly replied, exactly. And for the first time, the whole family's in on it. She hung up. Jen exploded in the group chat, calling me manipulative, vindictive, and obsessed with playing the victim. But her tantrum only made things worse for her, because people started chiming in. Sophie reminded everyone that Jen had deliberately excluded her from events too. My cousin Leo posted screenshots of Jen mocking another relative in a private chat. Aunt Marie, bless her, said what everyone else was thinking. This might have been uncomfortable, but it needed to be said. Dad didn't respond at all. He went silent. That's how I knew it had landed. He only shuts up when he knows he's cornered. What really tipped the scales, though, was when Rachel's husband, remember, the guy I helped land his job, replied to the email with a single sentence. You're not wrong, Eric. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. That cracked the dam. People started opening up, sharing their own stories of being snubbed, dismissed, used. It was like the family's perfect little facade had been pierced, and everyone could finally breathe. Within days, the family's carefully curated image began to crumble. The matching shirt picnics, the all smiles photo dumps, the fake unity. It was all smoke and mirrors, and now the smoke was clearing. And as for me, I didn't return to the family functions. I didn't respond to the passive-aggressive invitations or the olive branch texts meant to make them feel better without ever apologizing. I stayed out, and it was peaceful. I took up hiking again, reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with while juggling family obligations. I even started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I finally had space to unpack everything I'd shoved down for decades. A few months later, something happened that might have shattered me in the past. Mom ended up in the hospital for a minor surgery. Nothing life-threatening. But Jen called me, clearly expecting me to drop everything and rush over. You're still her son, Eric. I paused before answering. No, I said. I was a son to people who treated me like one. I don't know who you and Mom decided I was, but I'm not that anymore. Then I blocked her. A week later, Rachel emailed me, not to guilt trip, but to genuinely apologize. She said she didn't realize how bad things had gotten, and she was sorry for being complicit. I didn't fully forgive her, but I appreciated the honesty. I told her so. We didn't pretend everything was fine. That was the first real adult conversation I'd had with a family member in years. And the best part? Ellie, little baby Ellie, grew up never knowing me as the family ghost. I sent her a birthday gift anyway. Not out of guilt, not to buy my way in, but because I still believed in doing things for the right reasons. Just not for the wrong people. Eventually, the calls stopped. The messages stopped. The invitations stopped. And I smiled every time one didn't come. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't an afterthought. I wasn't a helper, a ghost, a wallet, a plus one. I was Eric, the guy who stopped apologizing for taking up space. And trust me, they never forgot me again. They couldn't. I'm Noah, 28, and the day my grandmother's will was read, my parents walked into the paneled conference room like winners who'd already shaken hands with the finish line. I hadn't seen them in years, by their choice, not mine. So the first thing that hit me wasn't the shock. It was the smell of her lodge on their coats, that mix of pine sap and wood smoke that used to mean hot cocoa and a chessboard with one missing pawn. They stood behind the leather chairs at the long oak table and nodded at each other, all businesslike grins, as if the lawyer had set out a platter of success just for them. My father wore the cool, careful smile he practiced in mirrors before job interviews. My mother gave me a glance so quick and flat it felt like checking a box. Present, acknowledged, dismissed. Between them sat my older sister, Elena, silver watch, crisp ponytail, flipping through a lined notepad like she was prepping for a quarterly review. They didn't sit near me. They didn't speak to me. They had already decided what this day meant. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who remembers the exact way a window throws light across a floor during the worst moments of his life, but I do remember that. The conference room window framed a slice of the mountains like a painting. September air rolled in from the lodge's ridge as tiny motes drifted in the beam and broke against the side of the lawyer's briefcase. The lodge sat about an hour outside town, 3 stories of cedar, hand-carved railings, and creaking steps that sang at night, and I'd always believed it had a pulse. If the realtor's sheet said $1,900,000, that number was just the outer skin. Inside it was birthday cakes and heavy quilts, my grandmother humming an old lullaby from the old country, and the way she could read a room before anyone else even realized there was a room to read. And now I was supposed to sit and listen while people who hadn't spoken to her in years decided how to cut it apart. If this all sounds melodramatic, I promise it wasn't. It was slow. It was the particular quiet of winter arriving early. The last time I'd seen my parents, I was 19 and still carrying boxes out of a dorm room that wasn't mine anymore because I had chosen the wrong major, the wrong job, the wrong sense of loyalty. They told me, with that clipped patience people reserve for children who've upset a table full of crystal glasses, that I was making everyone's life harder, that I should move out and be realistic. They didn't say I was disowned, but they used synonyms: independent, adult, consequences. I slept in my car for 2 weeks and learned the mountain roads by heart so I could make it to my grandmother's on the weekends, claiming work on the firewood stack as the reason to stay. She made eggs with too much butter and told me about stubborn trees that bent in windstorms and survived. We never talked about my parents, not really. She had a way of making you feel like your decisions weren't the end of the world, just paragraphs in a book with a lot of pages left. I built a life that didn't need their validation. I got a job at a small trail outfitter, the kind of place that smells like canvas and soap. I learned every boot they sold, every seam in each pack. I walked people through day hikes, overnight trips, and searches for the perfect sock. It was not glamorous, and it was not the life my family bragged about at holiday parties. But at the end of the day, I owned myself. I still took the drive to the lodge twice a month, kept the gutters clear of needles, sanded a loose stair tread, and, when the snow came, clipped the old-fashioned snowshoes to the porch rail like ornaments waiting for feet. As my grandmother's hands grew unsteady, I stopped pretending I was only there for chores and started bringing soup and reading to her from the local paper. She'd listen, eyes closed, and then ask, in that quiet way she had, "Noah, do you know what you're worth?" I always thought she meant my hourly. She meant something else. The lawyer, his name is Daniel Hayes, but he looks like a Mr. Hayes who was born wearing a tie, asked us to sit. My parents finally acknowledged me with the smallest flinch when I pulled my chair in. The leather stuck to my shirt through a patch of sweat between my shoulder blades. Elena took the seat directly next to the lawyer, which would have been funny if I wasn't already tired. Polish on the nails, pin ready, everything in neat, controllable lines. She had been their star since we were 10 and 12. She got the scholarships, the ladder of promotions, the unspoken contract that she would never make choices that made them look bad at dinner. I think the first time I ever understood I was an idea, not a son, was the day my father told me, after a Little League game, "We will always support you so long as you honor our family." I had struck out twice. Maybe honor begins with baseballs. Maybe it ends with property. "We're here to execute the last will and testament of Mrs. Daria Novak," Mr. Hayes began. He explained the formalities, the witness signatures, the copies, the sealed envelope. My mother touched my father's hand and gave him a smile smoothed by teeth whitening. He didn't look at me. I could hear my own swallow in the pause after the lawyer's sentence, that little click that seems louder because it's your own body reminding you that you exist. "I have to say," Elena whispered, leaning toward my mother, "turning it into a destination brand is the only thing that makes sense. All that wasted equity." She didn't bother to lower her voice enough. I watched her eyes move as if she were already a co-owner scanning a blueprint. Knock out a wall, add a deck, replace quilts with industrial throws that could survive a spill and a Yelp photo. My parents had been smiling since they walked in, but the word brand sharpened my father's jawline into something triumphant. He'd always wanted to talk like that. His dream vocabulary: assets, optimization, yield. Mr. Hayes listed the small things first. Jewelry to 3 nieces. Her silver hairbrush set to an old friend. 2 quilts to a neighbor who always shoveled the porch steps after storms. I felt my throat tighten. The quilts had names, she used to tell me. Bear Path, Carpenter's Wheel, Star Mountain. The room's light shifted as a cloud moved outside, and for a moment the mountains in the window looked closer, darkened into a single shoulder running toward us. "And now," Mr. Hayes said, turning a page with care, "to the real property located at 7 Ridge Road, known to you perhaps as the Novak Mountain Lodge." I couldn't help it. I straightened. My mother dragged her chair a fraction of an inch forward as if to meet a finishing tape. "My lodge," my grandmother had always said, "belongs to the person who loves it enough to defend it." She had never told me what that meant. She had never said you. She had only asked if I knew what I was worth. Mr. Hayes read, clear and even. I hereby devise and bequeath the Novak Mountain Lodge, including all fixtures, land, and appurtenances, appraised at $1,900,000, to my grandson, Noah James Novak, in fee simple, together with the 4 rental cabins marked on the attached survey. This bequest is made with full knowledge and intent and supersedes all prior instruments. My father's smile froze from the outside in. My mother's fingers, still on his hand, went rigid. Elena's pen stopped mid-scratch, so suddenly it squeaked. I didn't breathe for a second. Even when you allow yourself to imagine something, the real moment feels like you've stepped off a curb you misjudged. Nothing underfoot for half a beat, then a jolt. I forced air out of my chest with a short exhale that probably sounded like a laugh. I wasn't laughing. I was remembering my grandmother's last week, the way she asked me to bring the green tin from her bedroom closet and told me to check that the cedar blocks hadn't gone dry. She had looked past me then, toward a window where it was raining, and said, "Noah, some people think love is proven by who arrives when the table is set. Sometimes love is proven by who shows up with firewood when the stove goes out." I had joked, "Are you telling me to become a lumberjack?" She had squeezed my hand, and her eyes were glossy but steady. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat. "There are, however, conditions." The word dropped like a stone into a still lake. "Mrs. Novak has included several clauses regarding management, sale, and contest." My parents' smiles returned, brittle but showing. "Of course," my father said. "As a family, we're prepared to." "It goes to Noah outright," Elena cut in, nodding to me without looking at me, "but he'll need guidance. He's inexperienced." She offered Mr. Hayes a professional wince of sympathy. "We're here to help. We can turn this into a real operation." "Ms. Novak," Mr. Hayes said politely, "if I might finish?" He didn't wait for her answer. "The first clause is a no-sale provision. The lodge cannot be sold for a period of 7 years. The second identifies a land trust as a remainder beneficiary in the event of a sale or contest within that period. The third clause names a management successor in case of incapacity, which is unusual but lawful. The fourth clause is quite specific." He looked at me. He looked at my parents. Then he looked down at the page as if he were bracing himself. "It concerns access and residency." I could feel my heart picking up. The window's light dimmed again as another cloud slid over the sun. I know it sounds odd, but even the wood grain in the table seemed to lift and tense. Mr. Hayes read, "Owing to past conduct and my personal knowledge of their intentions regarding my property, I expressly forbid my son, Martin Novak, and my daughter-in-law, Claire Novak, and any entity controlled by them, from residing at, operating, managing, leasing, or otherwise benefiting from the lodge or associated cabins, directly or indirectly, for the period of the no-sale clause. Any violation shall be grounds for immediate injunctive relief and liquidated damages, as outlined in Attachment C. They are permitted to visit as guests only with my grandson's written consent." The quiet that followed wasn't silent. It was crowded. The mountain wind moved and the furnace ticked, and somewhere down the hall a printer warmed up. My mother's hand withdrew from my father's as if burned. Elena turned to stare at me for the first time. "She can't do that," my father said, "but not to anyone." He said it to the air. "She can't." "She did," Mr. Hayes replied gently. "We reviewed this with her at length. She was very clear. It's enforceable." My mother sat straighter, smoothing the edge of a folder. "This is obviously a misunderstanding. Daria loved family. She wanted this for the family." The memory that appeared in my mind then was not a holiday or a cake. It was my grandmother standing under the porch light last winter, telling me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a forest is keep out those who only see trees as boards. I had not understood it needed to be said this directly. Elena leaned forward, recovering her composure. "All right," she said briskly. "If the lodge cannot be sold for 7 years, we can still develop. Sweat equity. We can lease services to it. We can leverage the brand and..." "The clause prohibits indirect benefit," Mr. Hayes said. "No management fees. No third-party leases to entities you control." She anticipated that model. Elena's voice softened, the way people soften it when they think charm will carry the day. "Mr. Hayes, with respect, Noah can't do this alone. He hasn't run a property. He hasn't even..." I can speak for myself, I said, surprised at my own tone, which came out steady. I've been managing it with her for the last year. It wasn't the full truth. I'd done more than that. Put together a calendar for the cabins, updated the website that a friendly neighbor had built in 2009, reshot photos after snowstorms, and coordinated the roofers who fixed the leak above room 7. But it felt too much like bragging to list it. My stomach hurt with the kind that mixes fear and relief. My father's mouth twitched. You should have told us, he said. You should have looped us in. This is exactly what happens when you make unilateral decisions, Noah. You embarrass people. The word hit the room with such familiarity that I suddenly felt 19 again, carrying a cardboard box past his living room sermon on responsibility. There is a fifth clause, Mr. Hayes continued, as if he had to keep momentum before anyone could breathe. It's what we would call a no-contest provision with teeth. Anyone who challenges this will, upon initiating action, trigger the immediate transfer of the 4 cabins to the Novak Land Trust, with the lodge following upon the first adverse filing. That means even if the challenge fails, the cabins would have already transferred to the trust and remain there. Mrs. Novak wanted to make her wishes indelible. There's no such thing as indelible, my mother murmured, but her voice had gone far away. Mr. Hayes folded one page back and tapped a small paperclip bundle. And there is an attachment D, an affidavit and a recorded statement. She asked that I play it only if necessary. He glanced at me, then at my parents. I would like to remind everyone present that you may, of course, seek counsel, but if you speak now, you will be speaking on the record of this reading. I felt the shape of grief and gratitude pushing against my ribs. My grandmother had not only seen them, she had anticipated the move they were already rehearsing, the exact angle of my father's jaw before he said the phrase fiduciary duty, the turn of Elena's pen as she tried to write her way around the word forbid. I was not used to anyone, anywhere, building guardrails for me. People had removed them and told me to learn balance. I realized my hands were clenched in my lap and forced them to loosen. That woman, my father said, and his voice, gentle for the lawyer but sharp enough for me to recognize the old blade underneath, was not in her right mind near the end. She relied on Noah. He influenced her. This document is suspect. He turned to Mr. Hayes with a conciliatory tilt of his head. Of course we'll be reasonable. We simply need to ensure the best outcome for the asset. It's a lodge, I said before I could stop myself. It's her home. Elena shot me a warning look. Noah, don't make this emotional. Be practical. Do you know what deferred maintenance does to a property like this? Do you know what the market's like? You can't operate on sentiment. She wanted it preserved, I said. My voice shook a little. She wanted the forest paths maintained and the creek kept clean and the cabins patched, not flipped. She wanted to hear boots on the porch that didn't belong to contractors. My mother let out a soft breath that held too many winters. Enough. We raised you, Noah. Don't forget that. The words landed like a dull bell. My grandmother had once told me that people in pain make smaller rooms for others so they can feel bigger in them. I looked at my mother's hands and remembered them packing lunches when I was 8. How she always cut the apple into 8 even slices. I looked at my father and remembered him teaching me to tie a tie for a school dance, how the knot had come out crooked and he'd laughed, really laughed, like a different man in a different story. I wanted to say that I hadn't forgotten. I wanted to say that remembering didn't mean obedience. Mr. Hayes placed his hand on the paperclip bundle. He had the expression of someone about to set a cup down on a surface he didn't trust. Mrs. Novak asked me to share an additional document if, and only if, her wishes were challenged by specific individuals. He tapped the names with a pen. That would be now. What is it? Elena asked, too fast. A sworn statement and a video file, he replied. In the statement, she describes conversations she had with each of you in the months prior to her death, as well as an incident involving a meeting at Ridge Cafe where the subject of a sale was raised without her consent. She references notes. She references an offer letter from a developer. She references, he stopped. Something else. For the first time since he started reading, I saw a personal reaction slip through his professional frame. Troubled, then resolute. My father sat back like he'd just realized the chair had arms. We have nothing to hide, he said, and it sounded exactly like a line meant to be heard by a jury. Play whatever you want. My mother's face flickered. Martin. Play it, he repeated. He turned to me. If this is a performance, Noah, you won't like the curtain call. The wind outside pushed a fur bough against the window, a soft scrape. Mr. Hayes lifted a small drive from an envelope, set it beside his laptop, and hesitated. He looked at me, not at them. Noah, he said, she wanted you to be the one to decide if this is necessary. She believed you'd know. The room went still in a different way, a kind of reverse hush where even sound leaned forward. I saw my grandmother's kitchen, the first time I told her I'd gotten the job at the outfitter. She had wiped her hands on a towel and asked me, "Is this good work?" When I said yes, she told me that what we choose to build with our days builds us, too. I reached toward the drive and then stopped short of touching it. My parents were watching me with expressions I couldn't read all the way. Behind them, Elena's pen hovered, waiting to translate the air into strategy. I tried to count my own breaths. 1, 2. The small, familiar ache behind my breastbone eased as if someone had untied a knot. "Play it," I said quietly. Mr. Hayes nodded once. He slid the drive into his laptop. The screen lit with a simple folder, Novak, statement, video. He opened it. A single file appeared with a timestamp from 3 months ago and a title in my grandmother's unsteady typing, for when they try to take it. The room inhaled at the same time, my parents, Elena, even me. Mr. Hayes clicked. The screen brightened and then there she was, my grandmother in her blue sweater with the frayed cuffs, sitting in the lodge's parlor with the stone chimney behind her. She looked straight into the camera with that same steadiness she brought to everything she'd ever survived. She cleared her throat once and started to speak, and in the first sentence she said 3 names and a date, and the exact amount of an advance she had been pressured to accept, and the location where a document had been slid across a cafe table she had not asked to sit at, and my father, for the first time that morning, reached for a glass of water and missed it. "Pause," my mother said suddenly, her voice small but sharp. "Pause the video." She looked at me as if she were looking across a canyon and seeing someone she didn't recognize. "Noah, don't do this." I held her gaze. The screen's light washed over all of us. The fire in the parlor behind my grandmother crackled once. Mr. Hayes' finger hovered over the spacebar. And that's exactly where everything tilted, at the moment when a lifetime of quiet decisions gathered at the threshold of a single louder one. The wind rising in the firs and the mountains pressing closer through the window, as my grandmother's voice, steady and unshakable, continued to name what had happened while my family leaned forward, eyes wide, realizing there was more, much more, than any of them had expected. Mr. Hayes didn't pause. My grandmother's voice filled the conference room, warm but cutting through the air like a chisel finding a fault line in stone. On March 12th, Martin and Claire brought me to Ridge Cafe under the pretense of taking me for soup, she said, and I could see the steam curling behind her in the video, the old stone hearth, the chair I'd fixed with wood glue last winter. They set a paper before me and told me it was a simple authorization to get the roof work started. I read the first paragraph. It was not about the roof. It was about a sale. She looked directly at the lens and said the number of the offer, the developer's name, the date, and the clause authorizing her son to negotiate on her behalf due to increasing frailty. My father inhaled so sharply the sound startled even him. Elena's pen, which had been sitting poised, dropped an inch and tapped the table twice. My grandmother continued, measured, unhurried. I did not sign it. I asked for time to think. My son grew upset and told me I was being sentimental. My daughter-in-law took the pen and set it in my fingers. She held up her own hands, showing their tremor to the camera with a stubborn pride. They said they were protecting me from myself. I went home without signing. That night, I called Mr. Hayes. I asked him to come in the morning. I told him everything. Mr. Hayes glanced at me then, the look of someone confirming that a bridge he helped lay was holding. My mother whispered, too soft for anyone but the table to hear, "She's misremembering." But the video rolled on. My grandmother stated dates, the title of the developer's letter, and then, here her face shifted from firm to almost sad. She said, "This is not a punishment. This is my defense of a place I love, and of a boy who brought me soup and swept snow from my steps, while others brought me plans." The video dissolved into her signing the affidavit with steady breath, the notary stamping in the corner. It ended with her leaning forward and saying, "Noah, if you are hearing this, it is because I predicted rain and packed an umbrella." The file stopped. The room's light seemed duller, as if the glow from the laptop had been the only warmth. No one spoke first because no one wanted the responsibility of being that voice. Finally, Elena cleared her throat. "That was moving," she said, picking her words like stepping stones across a stream. "But emotions are not contracts. If anything, it shows Noah had access." She looked at Mr. Hayes. "You understand undue influence laws." Mr. Hayes folded his hands. "I do. I also understand capacity. We performed 2 evaluations. Both found her sound of mind. We have nurse statements. We have dates of medication. We have witnesses. If you choose to pursue that angle, we will, of course, present all this." He slid a thin folder a few inches forward so the tab peeked like a flag from a trench. My father tried again, this time reaching for the thread he always used when rules weren't on his side. "Tone. Noah," he said, and his voice softened into that gentle reprimand designed to make you feel ungrateful for breathing. "You're not hearing me. You are not ready for this. It isn't about childhood, it's about scale. $1.9 million is not cottage money. A lodge is a company. Payroll, licensing, insurance, lawsuits. If you fail, you don't just lose a building. You lose a livelihood, and we will have been right to worry." He spread his hands. "Let us help you." My mind was doing that thing where it splits in two. One part of me, the oldest part, the one trained to nod, to avoid making a scene, wanted to say I'd think about it, to buy peace. The other part remembered plowing the driveway at 5 in the morning alongside my grandmother while our breath made little clouds in the headlamp beams, remembered her telling me to place my weight over the shovel's handle instead of fighting the drift, to let gravity be my helper. She had turned hard work into technique. She had turned worry into practice. I tasted copper at the back of my mouth and realized my jaw had been clenched for minutes. "She already chose," I said, careful to keep my voice even. "This wasn't my idea. It was hers." My mother's expression, brittle for so long, finally cracked in a way that made her look briefly like the woman who used to knit on the couch and ask me what book I was reading. Underneath the performance, an ache flickered. "She pitted us against each other," my mother said. "She always did. She had a way of crowning favorites and then calling it fate. You don't see it because you benefited." That hit harder than I expected. I'd spent years telling myself I was not the sort of person who needed anyone's crown. Hearing that accusation, I felt 12 again, clutching a chess trophy the size of a houseplant while Elena brought home a list of achievements that rustled when you walked past the fridge. I swallowed. "I didn't ask for this," I said. "I showed up. There's a difference." "Enough," Elena said, shaking off whatever had grabbed her for a moment. "Strategy. There are angles. If we can't sell, we can create a separate company for services, cleaning, catering, marketing, and bill it. The clause says controlled by us, but we can route through colleagues. We're not breaking rules, we're partnering." She offered the room that corporate smile again, like a business card with all the sharp edges sanded off. Mr. Hayes took a breath that sounded like patience being rewrapped for later. "Your mother anticipated that angle as well. The clause defines beneficial interest broadly. Any arrangement that results in a net benefit to you or an entity remunerating you falls under the prohibition. And if you attempt to evade it, the trust activates. I strongly suggest we not treat this like a puzzle to be outsmarted." Elena sat back, lips thinning. My father's eyes shifted to me, as if only now recognizing I might not be bluffing. "How do you plan to fund this?" he asked. "Do you know the tax burden on a property like this? The roof, the boiler, the access road. You'll need lines of credit. You'll need guarantees. We have relationships. You do not. Banks are not charities." I had spent weeks after my grandmother passed organizing a pile of documents that smelled faintly of peppermint, and I knew exactly how much oil the ancient boiler drank. The last date the septic was pumped, the invoice from the roofer, the property tax bill with the little note she'd written to herself about the due date. I also knew something my father didn't. My grandmother had been careful and surprisingly modern when it came to paperwork. "There's a maintenance account," I said, letting the words land without flourish. "And a small endowment. She set them up 3 years ago. It's not endless, but it takes the edge off. I met with the credit union. I have a path." Saying it aloud made my throat go tight again, pride braided with terror. It felt strange to speak like someone with a plan in front of a man who had only ever told me my plans were daydreams in better shoes. My mother blinked. She did what? Mr. Hayes nodded. A dedicated account for repairs and capital expenses, funded from rental income and a small annuity she purchased when she sold a parcel 20 years ago. Noah has signatory authority. Again, she prepared. The line between my father's brows deepened. He pivoted. He always did. Elena, he said without looking at her, the way a foreman talks to the crew. Call Holden Realty. Tell them to send over the management contract template. We'll draft something advisory. If the boy refuses, we file an injunction to prevent waste. We claim he's jeopardizing a multi-million-dollar asset. We can get a temporary order in 48 hours. Martin, Mr. Hayes said, finally letting the weariness show. If you file anything, attachment C triggers. The cabins move to the trust the moment your action hits the clerk's desk. You will be suing to shrink the estate you claim to protect. My father looked at him the way a frustrated chess player looks at a board that refuses to produce a weak square. Then we'll negotiate. We'll present terms he cannot refuse. I watched the window. A pair of J's bounced between the fir branches like two notes on opposite ends of a piano. For a second, the ordinary world pierced the room with the simple fact of itself. I thought of guests who would check in next month with backpacks and warm socks. The couple who returned every anniversary and took the same photo in front of the carved bear by the front steps. The school group that came once a year to learn to snowshoe and left us a card with clumsy signatures shaped like little mountains. The lodge was not a spreadsheet. It was a place where lives brushed against each other and picked up a little of the other's snow. The door clicked. We all turned. In the hallway, two soft voices exchanged a few rapid words, and then Mr. Hayes' secretary stepped in with an apologetic tilt of her head. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said, eyes scanning the tension like a weather report. "But there's a gentleman here insisting he needs to speak to whoever is responsible for the lodge. He says it cannot wait." My father stood, seeing an opening. "Send him in," he said before Mr. Hayes could answer. "We represent the family." The secretary hesitated and then looked at me. Her eyes asked questions. I nodded once. "It's fine," I said. "If it's about the lodge, I should hear it." A man stepped in who didn't look like a developer or a banker. He looked like a local who knows the mountain's moods. Windburned cheeks, clean jacket with a park emblem stitched at the chest, an envelope tucked under his arm. He took in the conference room, my parents' posture, Mr. Hayes' neat stack of papers, my hands flat on the table, then rested his gaze on me as if testing a door he hoped would open. "You Noah?" he said. "Yes. I'm Dan from Forest Service," he said. "We've been in touch with Mrs. Novak in the past. I tried to call yesterday, but..." He stopped, glanced toward the folder with my grandmother's name, and recalibrated. "We flagged something on last week's trail inspection down by the south parcel. You got a moment?" He lifted the envelope. On the corner was a map. My father exhaled in irritation. "We're in the middle of legal proceedings," he said. "Whatever it is, it can wait." Dan shook his head. "It can't," he said simply. "There's a survey marker that moved, and a path cut that shouldn't be. It looks like someone started putting stakes in along the creek. Private stakes, not ours." He slid a photo from the envelope, bright orange flags fluttering in front of a line of alders. "If those are where I think they are, someone's planning to run a road. Right through the lower meadow." Elena leaned forward despite herself. "A road? Who?" "Not sure yet," Dan said. "We found tire tracks that don't match usual maintenance. And this." He placed another item on the table, a laminated badge half hidden in dirt. The logo on it made my father's face go still. Holden Development. I didn't know the name, but my father did. I could read it in the way his jaw worked once, twice, as if chewing a thought he didn't want to swallow. The badge had a first name and an initial. The same developer my grandmother had named on the video. The same one whose letter she had refused. Mr. Hayes swore under his breath in a very careful way that added no heat to the room. "If they've started encroaching," he said, "we can get an emergency order. But we need proof. Photos, GPS witnesses." Dan nodded. "I've got some. Not enough for a judge who likes everything in triplicate." He tipped the envelope toward me. "But I figured the owner should know. Before the stakes become gravel." My mother spoke up for the first time in minutes, voice tight. "We had nothing to do with that." It came out fast, unasked, a defense against a charge no one had made explicitly yet. It hung in the air like a foghorn in clear weather. Elena found her footing again. "Dan, you said you worked with our grandmother in the past," she said, switching to friendly neighbor mode. You know we all want what's best. Dan's eyes slid past her to me. What I know, he said evenly, is that Mrs. Novak called twice last year about a different neighbor who tried to cut a new path. She was clear about boundaries. She walked them herself. He nodded at me. You want to walk them now? My father laughed once, a small dry sound. Now, he said. In the middle of this? Dan didn't look at him. The flags will be gone by tomorrow if the person who set them knows they've been seen. I felt a current move under my ribs, the kind of hard clarity that arrives not with triumph, but with the sense that you are standing exactly where your next step must be. This was not about a contract I could negotiate around a table. This was about the land itself, the creek that threaded the meadow, the little footbridge I'd mended with my grandmother in spring. I stood without realizing I had. We'll go, I said. We, my mother echoed, as if the word were a challenge. I looked at Dan. I'll go, I corrected. Mr. Hayes, if there's a way to file something today, file it. If there's a form, hand it to me when I get back. Elena, I hesitated. I won't stop you from hiring a lawyer. But the first thing I'm doing as the person who now holds the keys is walking those boundary lines. Elena opened her mouth to argue. My father beat her to it. You're not leaving this room with this unsettled, he said, hand flat on the table as if he could pin the moment like a paper. You think you can run out to the woods and play surveyor, and that makes you an owner? Sit down. Something in his voice, the old leash hidden in it, tugged out a version of me that always sat. But then I saw my grandmother on the screen again, bones thinner but eyes steady, telling me that some decisions must be made with your feet, not just your head. I reached for the envelope. Dan slid it toward me. The paper rasped on the wood like a quiet yes. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat. Before you go, he said, one more thing. He pulled a small, heavy object from a drawer and set it down in front of me. It was a brass key on a fob with an etched number I knew by heart. 3. The safe deposit box at Maple Street Credit Union. My grandmother and I had visited that vault once, years ago, when she wanted to show me where old letters slept. She asked me to give you this at the reading, he said. I was going to hand it over after, but given the developments, I think now is wiser. He hesitated. She said there are documents in there you wouldn't know what to do with if anyone tried to bend the mountain into a straight line. The room seemed to tilt a degree, like a ship turning. My father stared at the key as if it were a piece of metal that could ruin a generation. My mother looked trapped between two versions of herself, one who wanted to stop this and one who wanted to go home and sit in the quiet for the first time in years. Elena's eyes flickered, not greed, exactly, but calculation, trying to compute what new information might do to the game board. I slipped the key into my pocket. It had a reassuring weight, not heavy like a chain, but heavy like a tool. I looked at my parents one by one. I'm walking the boundary, I said again, quieter. You can come if you want, but I'm not asking permission. Dan nodded toward the door with a half grin that wasn't unkind. Bring boots, he said. It's muddy down by the creek. My father pushed his chair back, so suddenly it scraped the floor. Elena, he said, voice clipped, call Holden. Tell them to stand by. Then ring Patterson at the firm. If he's in court, have him pulled out. We're moving. He turned to Mr. Hayes with a look that was almost pity, almost fury. You may think you've locked this up with clauses and videos, but you underestimate how much muscle the world gives people who refuse to be sidelined. Mr. Hayes didn't flinch. I don't underestimate anything, he said. I only read what is. I took a breath that tasted like bark and paper and the metal of the key. Dan held the door. The hallway smelled faintly of toner and rain. Behind me, I heard my mother stand as if a string had pulled her up. Noah, she said, and the way she said my name made me stop with one hand on the doorframe. You're making a mistake. I turned enough to meet her eyes. For a heartbeat, we were two people in a story neither of us had written, only inherited. Maybe, I said, but it will be mine. We stepped into the hall, and the closing door cut the conference room in half, like a photograph shuttering. Dan moved fast, purposeful, the kind of fast that comes from knowing the difference between urgent and loud. Outside, the mountain air shook the tightness out of my lungs. We headed for his truck. He handed me the envelope, and I tucked it under my arm, the corner of the map poking my skin through the jacket as if insisting on being felt. Halfway down the steps, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Dan paused, reading my hesitation like trail sign. Could be important, he said. I answered. Hello. A calm, unfamiliar voice. Is this Noah Novak? Yes. This is Holden Development, the voice said, polite in that way that filed off fingerprints. We understand there's been a change in circumstances. We'd like to make you an offer directly for the meadow and creek rights. Expedited, generous, and confidential. If you accept within 24 hours, we can wire a substantial deposit today. I stopped on the second to last step. Wind moved through the firs with a sound like a match being struck. I don't sell what isn't for sale, I said. The voice smiled without moving a face. Everything has a price, Noah. Even principles. Even nostalgia. Especially when those around you are persuasive. My father's voice in the conference room. Elena's pen poised to turn air into contracts. The brass key warm in my pocket. Dan watching my face with patient attention. My grandmother's recording, steady and unashamed, naming what people had tried to do in the kind of daylight that makes shadows honest. What exactly? I asked, and my voice surprised me by how steady it was. Do you think you're buying? There was a soft chuckle. Time. Silence. Easement. You can keep your little lodge cosplay. We just need a road. A road. Through the meadow. Past the bridge I'd patched with my grandmother while she told me that snowmelt sings a different note every year. I stared at the valley where the creek ran like a thread of glass no one had the right to smudge. Dan touched the envelope. We should go, he said. I lifted the phone again. I'll give you my answer, I said. But not on a call. 24 hours, the voice repeated. After that, we take a different route. The line went dead. I slid the phone into my pocket. We climbed into the truck. The door thunk, a kind of answer to the world's suggestion that everything bends with enough pressure. Dan started the engine. The wipers began a slow rhythm across the windshield as a light rain started to patter, each drop a small percussion on the hood. We turned down the drive toward the south parcel, the trees closing in like an audience leaning forward, the map between us on the bench seat, that brass key heavy against my thigh, and somewhere behind us a conference room where my family was deciding whether to become my opponents or my witnesses. As the truck's tires found the gravel, Dan glanced over. You know, he said, tone conversational like he was asking about weather. If those stakes are where I think they are, they'd have to have permission from the adjacent owner too. The old Hanson parcel. But Hanson sold last year to a shell company out of state. No listed address. I gripped the envelope a little tighter. Do you know the company name? He nodded. Ridgepoint Acquisitions. I didn't recognize it. But the way Dan added, almost as an afterthought, we traced a contact number for Ridgepoint once. It forwarded to a landline in town. Made my chest fold inward. Whose? I asked. Dan shot me a brief, apologetic look. The caller ID pinged something like Patterson and Lowe. Your father mentioned a Patterson, didn't he? The truck rolled on. The rain sharpened, thin as needles, startling in its suddenness. We took the turn where the gravel gives up and becomes dirt, the meadow opening to our right like a held breath. In the distance, bright as a wrong note in a familiar song, a line of orange flags fluttered in a wind that had started to rise. And just as I slid my hand into my pocket to feel the key again, a second phone began to buzz, not mine this time, but Dan's, lighting up his dash with a caller ID I couldn't see. He frowned, glanced at it, and then handed me the device without taking his eyes off the rutted road. You should answer, he said. It's Mr. Hayes. I brought the phone to my ear, the meadow opening, the flag snapping, the creek glinting like a thin blade, and Mr. Hayes' voice came through over a hiss of office air. Noah, he said, I just opened the sealed letter that came with your grandmother's video. There's something you need to know before you set foot on that meadow. It changes everything about who can and can't put a road there. He paused, the kind of pause that rearranges furniture inside a life. Your grandmother recorded a deed transfer to you and to someone else. Co-ownership of the south parcel, named by first and middle only to avoid attention. She wrote that the second owner would know when the time came. Mr. Hayes' voice in Dan's truck sounded like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Noah, he said, your grandmother transferred the south parcel to you and one other person. She didn't want the name read unless it was necessary, but with those flags out there, it's necessary. The co-owner is Daniel Hayes. Me. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. My grandmother had made her lawyer a co-owner of part of the land, but then the pieces began to fall together like stones finally finding their places in a wall. He'd been more than her lawyer. He'd been her friend for 40 years. He and his wife had shared dinners at the lodge, helped her through winters, and, as I now realized, promised her one thing my family never could: protection. By tying him to the land legally, she had ensured someone with both power and loyalty would stand guard if anyone tried to chip away at her wishes. Dan turned the wheel, guiding the truck closer to the meadow where the orange flags fluttered. That, he said slowly, changes the game. It did, because now it wasn't just me, the estranged grandson with limited experience, holding the line against developers and my parents' schemes. It was me and a seasoned lawyer who had spent decades navigating contracts and courts, who had his own skin in the fight. The lodge wasn't standing alone anymore. When we reached the meadow, the rain had stopped, leaving the air sharp with wet grass and pine. The flags cut across the earth like wounds. Dan took photos while I crouched near the creek, running my hand across the damp soil where tire tracks curved too close to the water. The creek whispered as it always had, unbothered but watchful. I thought of my grandmother's words: sometimes love is proven by who shows up with firewood when the stove goes out. I had shown up. She had made sure I wasn't the only one. That evening, back in town, we met at Mr. Hayes' office. He laid out the co-ownership deed, stamped and sealed. "This is airtight," he told me. "With me named, Holden can't bully you with threats of inexperience. And if your parents want to file something, they'll have to do it against me too. I've spent my career preparing for people who think pressure is a substitute for principle." It was the first time in my life an adult had looked at me not as someone to scold or rescue, but as a partner. The next morning, we filed an emergency injunction against Holden's encroachment, attaching the photos and Dan's sworn statement. Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, a judge had ordered Holden to cease all activity near the creek until further notice. The orange flags were pulled out, their absence as loud as their presence had been. My parents, furious, tried to push through back channels. Elena drafted proposals for advisory committees, waving them in front of me with that same polished smile. My father hinted at loans, just until you find your footing. My mother tried guilt, sitting across from me at the lodge's kitchen table saying, "Your grandmother would hate seeing us like this." But here's what she didn't understand. My grandmother had already seen us like this. That's why she had written those clauses. That's why she'd given me the key and given Hayes the deed. Love wasn't blind, it was watchful. The months that followed weren't easy. Running the lodge meant dawns spent fixing heaters, afternoons answering booking emails, nights making sure guests had firewood stacked high enough. But it also meant laughter in the dining hall, the smell of pancakes on winter mornings, hikers returning with stories of trails that left them breathless. Every time I felt doubt creep in, I'd walk the creek line, where the flags had once stood, and remind myself, this place is still whole. Holden eventually pulled out. They couldn't fight the injunction, not with Hayes holding co-ownership and my grandmother's affidavit making their prior dealings look like vultures circling too soon. The shell company that bought the Hanson parcel dissolved within 6 months. The road project vanished like smoke in the wind. As for my parents, they stopped calling after a while. At first, I thought the silence would ache. But instead, it made room for new sounds: the laughter of guests, the crunch of snow under boots, the steady hum of a place alive and unbroken. Elena sent one last email, terse and professional, saying she wished me the best, but hoped I'd reconsider partnership in the future. I didn't reply. Some messages deserve to sit unread. One spring morning, as the meadow bloomed with wildflowers, I found myself sitting on the porch steps where my grandmother and I used to rest after chores. I pulled the brass key from my pocket. Inside the safe deposit box, I had found letters she'd written just for me. Advice, encouragement, and one final reminder. Noah, mountains outlast those who only see them as stone, but they remember those who walk their paths with care. I smiled then, a real one, not forced or defensive, because she was right. The lodge wasn't just worth $1.9 million. It was worth every moment of struggle it had taken to protect it. It was worth my name, my effort, my future. And it was worth hers. That's how it ended. Not with a sale, not with a fight lost, but with a family's greed turned back by foresight and trust. My parents had walked into that while reading thinking they'd already won. But my grandmother had seen the truth long before they arrived. She had chosen love over image, legacy over greed. And now, every time guests check in, Every time I hear boots on the porch at night or laughter echoing through the halls, I know exactly what she meant when she asked if I knew my worth. I know now, and it's measured not in their approval, not in dollar signs, but in every heartbeat this lodge still holds, untouched, unbroken, and finally, truly mine.